Welcome to the complete Adobe Photoshop Mega Course, a course that is going to prepare you from start to finish on how to use one of Adobe's best programs. Whether you're a complete beginner or just trying to go pro, you've landed in the right place. Let's get started, launch Photoshop, grab your favorite drink, and let's go. So before we jump into Photoshop, this is the screen that you're going to be greeted with. This is the home screen, and for the latest versions, you're going to see the same thing, but if you have the older versions of Photoshop, the placement of the panels may be different. So let's start from the top left. This is where you get to make your new file, start a project, and when we click on this, we have a lot of options for different dimensions, difference in depth per inch, color modes, and many other things. So I'm going to come back to this later because I do want to show you what the rest of these things are for, and then we can go ahead and create our first project and look at the different tools that Photoshop has to offer. So this is for new file. This is when we want to open an image, an older project, any other format. We just click on it and it takes us to the regular directory. The home screen, when you click it, it's the same page. There is the Learn panel where you get to explore Photoshop through their own tutorials. So it kind of does a walkthrough if you want to learn, let's say, painting with the brush tool. It's 4 minutes. It happens in the app and it gives you a little snippet about what it's about. So if I click on, let's say, get to know the app, it brings me to the other screen and I get to start the tutorial. Then you can just click next and exit right over here. To return back to the home screen, just click on home and then home. So that's a really cool feature they added for the newer versions of Photoshop. There is your files. These are personal to your own accounts. So whatever you've used to sign into Photoshop, these are the files that are within that account. There is shared with you. If anyone has shared file with you, they're going to show up in this panel. Lightroom photos. Lightroom is another application for photo editing. You can open a Lightroom project and then have it send that image to Photoshop. So let's say you've color coded, fixed the brightness and whatever, then you want to do some Photoshop work. You click on here and find that photo that you're trying to edit. We also have a deleted tab. Anything you delete will be there for you to maybe restore or just see what you've deleted. Right over here are some of the newer stuff. So they always change whenever there's a new update, so yours may not look the same. On the top right, we have the cloud. So if you do have your account connected, you have your Adobe Cloud right over here. You can see your storage. I have 2 terabytes. Yours may be different. And if for some reason it's not syncing, there is usually a button that lets you resume it and configure why it's not doing that. But when you have this check mark, it's syncing okay. And if you sign into Photoshop through a different device, log into this account, you can still access your files. We have a search bar right here. You can look for a certain project, a tutorial, anything else. This gift box is anything new about the version you're using. So I have these stuff to explore later. We're going to go through each of these ones in the further lessons. But again, if you don't have the latest versions, the stuff you see here may be different. Lastly, that's your account. If you click on it, it takes you to your browser and logs you in on Adobe. So I'm not going to click that because it'll just take me to my personal page. But if you wanted to sign out, edit your profile or anything, just click on this icon. Should be your profile picture. We can also change the view of our recent works. You can filter through your files, change them in different ways. And yeah, that's pretty much the home screen. If you click on this, you get to go back to your project. But we're going to assume that we don't have a project yet and create a file together. So click on New File. This window for New Document should pop up. We have some things up here. These are presets for different dimensions and DPIs. I'm going to start with photo. We have some pretty standard size things like landscape photos, Photoshop size. We can click on this for other things, portraits, and different items. We also have templates. This is again through Adobe. A lot of them are free, but there are some paid ones that you can explore too. So if I click on any of them, I can download them right here. I can actually see a preview first and see if I like it. It's by Adobe Stock. This is the artist, the name of that template, and it tells me exactly what that template includes. So we have the effect, sample text, and not included in the download file are these images that we see. So if we wanted to get this effect, the glass reflection, we would need to have our own pictures and simply download this template to implement the effect. So these are for pictures. I'll close this, go back here. Next we have print. So one thing that is different between photo, print, arts, and illustration, apart from their dimensions, is the resolution. So with photo, you can see that over here in resolution, the numbers may be different. If you're not sure what dimension or resolution you want to put on, it would help to look online and see what's the standard. So if you are designing something that you want to print, it's a good idea to get in contact with your printer to see how many DPIs you need for your file. Throughout this course, I will tell you some standard forms, but again, if you're doing some specialized things, be sure to double check with your printer or do a search to make sure that your size and quality is suitable for whatever purpose you're trying to achieve. So with photo, there is like 300 DPIs. You can also do it pixels per centimeter or pixels per inch. The higher this number is, the more high quality your work is. But we can't just put this for every other document because that's going to make it a very heavy file. So for images, for example, if you're importing a photo, there's no need to change the resolution here since the photo already has its own quality and pixels in set. But the only time where you would put a really high resolution is for something like arts and illustration, because this is where you are creating those pixels and it's not there already. So photo, when we come to the right, you can change the name of this preset, call it My Canvas or something. We get to save it right here, save the document preset, and then it's going to show up here. So let's just make one, call this My Picture. Hit save, and there's my picture. We can change the width and the height, change the unit it's in. You can also decide on your orientation, whether you want it to be a vertical portrait or a horizontal landscape. The button next to it is for artboards. We're going to get more into that in the layers lesson. Artboards are essentially different canvases that you can have for maybe different pages of your presentation, different artworks at the same time, and they're actually really efficient when you're dealing with bigger projects. Next, we have the resolution box. You can type in a number and then decide if you want it to be pixels per inch or per centimeter. The standard is usually 300 or maybe 100. Try not to go overboard with it unless you've been instructed to by your printer or a publisher. And once again, I'll go over into proper numbers in further lessons. Color mode is the way your colors are displayed on your project. Depending on your purpose, you would have to have different color profiles so that when you publish it, the colors look accurate on that display. So for example, RGB is usually for digital screens, but if you were to print like a physical paper, while choosing RGB, certain colors will look very different. And in a lot of cases, that can ruin your illustrations or photography. So depending on what you're trying to do, you would have to choose your different color maps. We have grayscale, which is just black and white, RGB for digital, CMYK for print. We have lab color. This is more specific to like special designs. I will go over some of them that are necessary for you to know as a beginner, but as you enhance your skills with Photoshop, you're going to come across maybe bitmaps, lab colors, and some other stuff. We also have the bit range. By default, it should be on 8-bit, but if you're doing a larger illustration that you want to print, you can go for a bit higher. Do not just put it on the highest one because you think it's going to make your work more high quality, because that can slow down your program, and worst case it may just crash your program and you can lose progress for your work. So for this lesson we're just going to go 8-bit and RGB. Let's assume we're just doing a digital work. Now background content is the first thing that you see when you make this project. So you can choose a different color. By default, it's white. You can turn it to black. If you choose background color, you can choose something from here. You can also do transparent, no background, get yourself a PNG. And then we have custom for you to choose a specific set of colors. So these are the different things. Let's go with white for now. We have some advanced options, which you can toggle like that. Color profile. When you open this is similar to what we talked about in color mode, but these are presets for certain things that you want to do. So for example, Adobe RGB is a profile by Adobe. It represents colors differently than compared to, let's say, Apple's RGB. We have image 3 and a bunch of other stuff. As a beginner, you don't really need to go too deep into this, but you can see that we have some pretty famous color profiles here, like Canon. We have some LUT over there. We got Fujifilm and all these stuff. These are official color profiles by these companies designed to represent your colors on whatever you make in Photoshop in their own unique way. But let's don't color manage because we're just trying to do something simple here. Lastly, we have pixel aspect ratio. Just an overview, everything you have on the screen is made up of pixels, and the aspect ratio is the overall size of those collective pixels. So when you click on this, we have square pixels and we have a bunch of other stuff. Now what you're choosing here is not the size of your canvas, but rather the shape of the pixel. So 1 pixel is a very tiny part of your screen, and by default we have everything as square pixels because we're trying to create digital artworks, photography, and other stuff. But if you're doing something different, let's say you're doing a special type of animation, video, you would want to go for the other types, which is different shapes for your pixels. So these are just non-square shapes. The first one is your square shape. Just like the color profiles, do not change these unless you were instructed to by a tutorial, by your video editor, or anyone else that is guiding you through those complex projects. For now, let's stick to square pixels, meaning that each pixel on our screen will be a square. There's also this search button down here for you to look for templates. These are meant to make your workflow a lot more easy. So let's say I want to make a poster. So you can type in the thing that you're trying to make, hit go, and it's going to open a page on Adobe Stock, which is kind of like Shutterstock but for Adobe, and you get to download different poster templates in either Photoshop format, Illustrator format, and just tweak it until it's your own. But we're not going to go too much into these. You could explore them in your own time, but for now let's just delete that and look over these stuff up here before creating our project. So this was photo, pretty self-explanatory. Now for prints, these are the different paper sizes. So we have the classic letter. These are the papers you see in your household printer. We have legal, tabloid. You can see the inch and their PPIs, pixels per inch. So you can see it's 300, so pretty high quality. You can find A4 papers, B3, and so many more. We still have that template feature down here to get you started on the project. So if I click on any of these, you can see that you can just click on them and change the width and height, choose a different unit, and just get started right away. Arts and illustrations are very focused on those pixels because you are, as we said, making them yourself. So you're not like importing an image, you're not importing a logo, but drawing things perhaps. And down here you can see the type of things that constitute as arts and illustration. So we have some text work over here, and these are generally more high quality work. So if you look at all presets, we have 1080p, which is the size of the usual screens. 720p, we have 1000 pixels, 2000, and you can just go up from there. If say you were instructed to do a 5000 pixels, you just replace that with a 5. Next we have our web. So you can actually create web interfaces on Photoshop. So you can see we have different screens, MacBook Pro 15, iMac, and all of that. Say you want to create a mock-up like these, or you want to make a landing page, send it to your developer. You can do it via Photoshop as well. What people do, if you're familiar with UI design, is create it here, import it to Figma, organize it a bit there and then hand that over to their developers. It's a pretty cool feature. As you can see, there's a lot that you can do within Photoshop. Then it's mobile, same thing, but just for the mobile screens. We have tablets here as well, Apple Watches, and instead of looking for what dimensions you need for these type of devices, Photoshop has it all here for you. Lastly is film and video. You can actually generate animations in Photoshop and even edit videos to some extent. Obviously, it's nothing like Premiere Pro or After Effects where you get to do a lot more complex work, but essentially it lets you perhaps bring your illustrations to life by making your character blink. It's pretty manual, I would say, compared to some other platforms out there. It does give you the capabilities to do stop motion and that sort of thing. We'll definitely look into how to animate and edit within Photoshop in further lessons, but this is where you would get started. Got 4K, got some special ones down here too, 8K, and so on forth. So that's our new document panel. Let's go ahead and make a simple square thing. I made this one before, I just called it logo. 600 by 600, 300 dpi. Let's go ahead and bring this down to 500 and this to maybe 200. RGB, 8-bit, and everything else is set to default. Now I'm going to turn on artboards. We'll look at that in a further lesson, but to set up our document, we're going to need to turn this on, or else you cannot follow along with what I'm doing. Since this is a square, doesn't really matter which one you choose. It's 500 by 500. But once you have that all set up, let's hit create. And there is our first box. If you're zoomed out like mine, hold down Command 0 or Control 0. So Command or Control 0 to zoom in. You can also do, let me zoom out again. Right click with the zoom tool and hit fit on screen. So whichever way you prefer. All right, so this is your Photoshop interface. This is where you create all sorts of stuff. And in the next following lessons, we're going to start by looking at this long range of tabs, then jump into the tools, some basic functionalities before we learn how to create things like a logo, text, maybe a poster, and all those stuff. Welcome back. In the previous lesson, we learned how to create our very first document. We made a simple square document, and now we are here to work on our canvas. So this white box that you see right in front of you is the canvas that you're going to be putting on all sorts of stuff. But before we get into that, we need to first understand how Photoshop functions. And that starts by looking at all these things on the right side of your screen. Now yours may not look exactly like this, but these are things that you can bring in from the window tab right over here. So you can see if I wanted to get color, we can see color right here. So if I'm pointing to something on the right and you do not see it on your screen, just pause, go to window, find it, and then just click it for it to show up on this right. Now the cool thing about Photoshop is that you can customize your workplace. Obviously, someone who is a graphic designer will have a different workspace than someone who is, say, an illustrator. So that's why Photoshop allows you to, say, take your favorite things, pull them out, maybe remove certain parts, and just keep the things that you're going to be using most often. For example, if I don't use the path window that often, I could right click and then just close it. So it's just going to disappear. But again, if I wanted it back, I can go to window and then find paths, click it once, and it's going to show up right over there. All right, so even when I bring in all the different tabs, you can see I have from top to bottom, it's all filled. They are in their own boxes. So notice this line between these four, and then there's one underneath these two, and they're all sort of separated. That is because each of these windows are for one specific purpose. So the first four that you see up there is all related to filling in your shapes, your text, your lines, mostly in regards to color, but there's also that pattern tab. So that's where we're going to begin, just starting with color, and then I'll make my way down in the next lessons. When you click on this, you're going to be greeted by all of these little groups, and when you toggle them on, when you expand them, you will see different colorful boxes. Now, a lot of these groups are there by default. So RGB, red, green, and blue, these are your classic digital colors. Right underneath, we have CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. K is for black here. And earlier when I said that the colors for RGB digital colors are different from print colors, you can kind of see what I was referring to. So if you pay close attention, you can see how the magenta or pink here is very different from the one right above it. Same thing with blue, the cyan, the green, the red, and the yellow. Now if you go on each one and just like click on it, you can see that it's still red in both cases, but it's just the way that they're represented on the screen. So be very careful with how you're choosing your colors to be represented when you're printing or where you're publishing online. Grayscale is just black and white. You start all the way from black to white and anything in between. We have pastels, light colors, darker colors, and all that stuff. You can make your own color palettes by clicking on this group icon. Let's call it my colors, hit OK, and I'm just going to click and drag it outside so it's not in RGB. So before I add a color, I can go down here. You'll notice two boxes. Double click on the front one and then choose that new favorite red. So I'm just going to grab a random one. You can also put in the hex code. This is unique to a number, to a color, I mean. You can find unique hex codes online on Pinterest. There's tons of websites out there for you to grab those specific colors. You can also change their values here. I will come back to this. I just want to make sure we finish swatches and then move on to the other stuff. So you can see that once I hit OK, I now have my new favorite red, or this new color that I want to add into the My Colors group. So once I have this selected, the group, I can hit the plus and call it my favorite red. And then just make sure the color is the same. There's this option for you to add it to your current library. Libraries are a way for you to organize any sort of media that you have on Photoshop. So we can have colors, we could have different patterns, different gradient maps, and so on forth. This is in regards to the libraries down here, so I'm going to get into that later. But if I don't want it to be in my library, I could just not check it. But for the purpose of our course, I'm going to check it and it's going to show up in my library. Once you're done, hit OK, and there's my new color. So anytime that I'm trying to draw, looking for my color, just hit on swatches, find it, and just click once on it. So if I had blue, like click once on it, it's going to choose that red. If I want to choose a different color, just click on them once and you can see they're being loaded up onto our brush. If you don't want that color anymore, you can delete it. So I'm just going to go down to a different color palette. Say I want to delete this. Hit the trash icon once. Okay, and it's gone. So pretty simple. And as we saw, we can reorder them. So say I want grayscale to be above RGB. I can just click and drag it. If you put it on RGB, it's going to go inside this group, which you could do for a different reason, but for now, I'm just going to have them all lined up like this. If you have tons of swatches out there, you can search for them. So let's go for my favorite red. There it is. You can go for only greens, and it loads the green in all of my groups, if they are labeled green. And that is pretty much our swatches panel. There are some options on the top right, this little hamburger menu. You can make a new preset, which is what we did with my favorite red color. Make a new group, the same thing as these two. Rename your group, delete the group, same thing. Tiny thumbnail, this is how they're displayed. So I could choose large list, and that's what it looks like. You can do tiny thumbnails, change that up to your liking. I'm gonna go back to the default, which is this. We also have the ability to show the search bar and the results. The recents, this is the search bar and these are the recents. If you don't want them to be visible, just click on them once and they disappear. We have append default swatches, which is changing our list to the way they were initially. So you can see that it brought all of these guys below and just sets them to the default. This is in case if you, for example, deleted half of these and you want to get the original pale group colors back, you can just click that to bring them. We can import swatches if you downloaded a group or a color palette from the internet that works with Photoshop. This is where you would import them. You can export your swatches. You can export these swatches for exchange. So you can save it like that on your screen, your computer. We have legacy swatches, which if you click once is going to load in some of the older swatches. So like paint color swatches, something specialized. So this is what they mean by that. We have close and then close tab group, which is just the same thing as doing that or just removing it completely from the list here. Speaking of that, if you right click on it, we can expand the panel like that, make it bigger if you want, minimize it, and then we can collapse it to icons, bring it back to what it was. Change the interface option. This goes into your preferences, but I like to keep it as default. So that is your swatches panel. Pretty straightforward, really helpful when it comes to anything you do within Photoshop. Alright, once we have this, right underneath is your color panel, which you can again load in from your window if you're not seeing it here. Now color is just color. You can click and drag the edge here to make it bigger. This is where you get to experiment with colors, maybe grab something real quick. And whatever I select, you can see down here, my foreground color changes. So I can start painting with whatever I select. So you can see that we have almost white on the left, black on the bottom, and the really pinky scenario on the top right. So in this color panel, going from left to right is your saturation. So if it's all the way saturated, you're going to get a very deep pink in this case. You can go with red to make it easier. So a very deep red would mean a very saturated red. If you go all the way to the left, there is zero saturation, which means there's no color, it's just white. Top to bottom is about the lightness of that color. So if you go all the way to the bottom right, you're just getting pure black. It's the same thing here. This is when you have no saturation, because this side means no saturation. And if you're all the way at the bottom, you have no lightness. So there's no light for there to be any color. But if you go all the way to the top, that's 100% lightness. So there is going to be color as much as you saturated in. So just try to understand the different sides of this square. It's going to help you make different color choices for your project. So this is pretty helpful tab to use. So this was saturation, lightness, and this bar here is your hue, which you can just grab in like that. Now notice how some of the colors give us this error message. So it says out of gamut for printing. We did talk about the CMYK RGB thing a little bit, but if you choose a very saturated green, like this guy, put this back, what it's gonna do is not let you print that exact color if you were to do it. But as I drag it to the left, you can see that there's no problem where I have it over here. My color profile is not exactly made for printing, but basically if you get a very saturated, very bright color, chances of your printer having that are low, especially if you have like a standard thing. But this is something you want to pay attention to. So if you are doing something for printing, your workflow in regards to color will be very different. So I would have to be very careful about the colors I'm choosing. I have to choose a different color profile, load in certain colors to avoid misprinting later on. But that's basically what this triangle means. Similarly, we have that hamburger menu. I can change the way my cube looks. So this is the hue cube. As we said, this was the hue. I can make it based on brightness. So now we have the hue on here, and then we have brightness on the right side. So when there's light, there's color. When there's no light, there's no color. That's the logic. You can choose your hue like this. Next, we have color wheel. This is something that most of you may be familiar with, but again, it's the same thing. We have hue around this triangle. We have brightness, really bright, really dark, full saturation. If you don't want to use this, you can use the sliders up here. So hue, saturation, which is how much color there is, and then brightness. Type in a number if you want. You can also use your arrow keys to go down by 1 increment and change your colors. Next, we have grayscale slider. This is in regards to how much black you have in that particular color. So every color that you see right here has a little black in it, which may not make sense when you're thinking of traditional paints. But let's say I want this blue. There is 84% of black in there. If I choose like a brighter color, it's 6%. If I choose this, it has 95%. Now in real life, when you try to add black paint, a little bit to your colors, it ruins the entire thing, but that's not the logic that is being used here because these are digital colors. Again, we can change the numbers by our arrow keys or with the slider. And just remember that on the digital world, like Photoshop, K is black. So it's not B, but K. Let's go to another one, RGB sliders, red, green, and blue for digital work. So how much red do we have in our color? The opposite of red is green. So I'm just going to bring these two like halfway so you can kind of see. So if I add red to my color, which is currently set to this peach thing, it's going to be peach. If I remove all of the red, I'm going to be left with a greenish color. And if I want to remove the green, I'll be left with blue. Add green all the way, I'm going to get a really bright green. Let's bring this to 0. Now that I have blue, if I remove all the blue, then I'm left with black. If I add all the blue, I'll get a very dark blue. So RGB, red, green, and blue, just decides how much of each color you have in your current color. It goes from 0 to 255. And that's the maximum you can have. So you can play around with these. As a beginner, you wouldn't really come to this tab. You would either import a color palette, use one of the presets, or just manually add in the numbers, the hex code to make it a lot more simpler. We have HSB sliders, which is hue, saturation, and brightness. Kind of looked at that already with a different panel. So hue, what color, saturation, how much of that color, brightness, how bright is that color. Pretty simple stuff. CMYK, this is for print. How much cyan is in that color, how much magenta is in that color, how much yellow, and how much black. So if you remove all the black, you can see we get a yellow. If I remove all the yellow, we just get white. Now lab colors are essentially like RGB. We are working with the 3 channels, but it just converts those channels, red, green, and blue, to light components. So light, or L, stands for luminance. You can see that when it's at 100%, we can see the colors, but if I remove that, there will be none left. It just turns to black. And then A represents the red and green. You can also see it somewhat here, and B stands for the blue and yellow. So just like the other specialized sliders, you wouldn't really come to this unless you were instructed to, or if you're trying to do something special. But it's good to understand what these letters stand for and why we have this many options. The last thing is web color sliders. This is for the websites. Basically, you can see it's in different components. That is because you are kind of formulating your hex code. Now hex codes they always start with a hashtag, so hence the hashtags you see here. They're composed of numbers and or letters. Essentially, it's a unique code for each color. So when you go on a website and you see a red button, if you were to find the code for that exact red that you would want displayed on your website, you would take in the hex code of that red button. So again, another specialized thing, if I just grab this color, you can see it starts with 69091C, and that is the color. When I double click on this, you can see down here we have 69091C, same thing. This is the hex code area. If you were to have a hex code from the internet, you just copy it and paste it there. Then hit OK and your color is ready to use. Alright, and since we're here, in the color picker panel. This is extremely helpful if you're trying to pick colors of another image, of a color palette, or you just want to manually type in the values and not use the sliders that we saw. So HSB, hue, saturation, brightness, that was I think one of the first ones we looked at. You can just put in a number. You can use your arrow keys as well. Let's put like 80. You can see that we can move it around. 80 saturation, 60 brightness. That is my color. Then we can see that automatically the red is set to 112, green is 153, and blue is 31. Let's get rid of some of the blue, increase the green, and increase the red. And that is our new color. Next we have lab that we just looked at. We can increase the luminance to say 95, get a really bright green. And the red and green is set to negative right now. We can make it even less. So I get a deeper green. And then I could add some of that blue and yellow. You can see it's turning kind of bluish. Just play around with these. CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black. You can change stuff like this. Let's remove some of the yellow and you can see I'm getting blue instead. If I add 100% K, I just get black. Now this new color, you can see it's not exactly fully black, is this unique code. If you're planning to use these codes, just remember that white is just FFFFF and then black is just 0. So it doesn't matter if you're here or here. These two numbers, it's good to know them. So if you're trying to get a pure black and you thought this would be it, this is not pure black. It needs to be all zeros. The same thing for white. If you're slightly off, this does look white, but it's not actually white. All right, and say you have this really nice color, you want to add it to your swatches, you can do it right here. It goes in that color palette that we made earlier. So let's just do that. Let's call it My Blue. Click OK. We can also put it in our, compare it with our color library. So these are specialized library for print mostly, or different types of display. The one at the bottom is our color. So I can compare it with these ones if I want to do some special project. And the last thing is web colors, basically colors that would display well on a digital screen and just meet these standards. So you can see it kind of added better grouping segment for us, so we can just clearly detect those things and go about finding our perfect color. A couple other things down here, we have copy color as HTML. So that's an HTML code if you're doing like a website or something, or you want to embed something in WordPress. Copy colors hex code, that's the code we looked at earlier. Then we have RGB spectrum, CMYK spectrum, grayscale, so the way it's displaying these colors, on what mode are we on. So you can see that it does change as I switch through. By default, it's on CMYK, but just toggle it here and make it your own. Then we have web safe. These are colors that are, as the name says, safe for the websites. So you can see that I will not have the issue of going somewhere in between because it's clearly indicated. Let's undo that. We can then close and then close this entire tab group. We can close this and the tab group itself. So that is all the color stuff that we have. We looked at swatches. There's also the same thing for gradients. Gradients are essentially how you go from one color to the next. This will be using the gradient tool, so I'm not going to go over it right now until we look at the tool right here. We also have patterns. These are pretty self-explanatory. It's just images that you get to fit inside shapes. Again, when I introduce you guys the shape tool, I can go over exactly how these functions. But just like how you have a library for your colors, for your gradients, you also have some for your patterns. And this is where they are located. We also have the channels. This is for when you want to look at a certain channel within your image. So if I were to import something real quick, you can see that RGB ends us with, I'm going to hit Command 0 to make it full screen. And the reason why you would want to go over channels is when you want to isolate a set of colors within a composition. So they're labeled clearly on the top right, the reds, the greens, and the blues. Going over them, you can just isolate them. So anything blue and red is currently being displayed right now. Anything green and red, it's like that. Red and green and blue, they look like that. So that's the only purpose of this particular panel. So that's all about just color inside Photoshop. When we move on to the tools, I will show you how to use these colors, but this lesson was meant to help you understand the logic behind them. Why do we have so many different sliders when we're just dealing with one color? What do the codes stand for, when and where you would want to use a certain color mode? And now that we know the basics, we can now move on to our next lesson where we take a look at the other panels on the right. There are so many tools in Photoshop, and it's really important to understand the basic foundation of what they are used for and how do they operate basically. This will be a rather long lesson, so I will be breaking them up into pieces and parts, and that way it would be more digestible. But it's important for you to follow along as I'm doing these exercises so you get a better grip of how these tools work. So the toolbar is located on your left. You should see the exact same thing. If for some reason you don't, just make sure you go to Window and turn on Tools. So if I undo this, I will not have the toolbar. Just make sure that this is selected. So starting from the top, we have our Move tool. This is used to move things around your canvas. So I'm going to import the image from last lesson. And to import, you can just open your Finder, drag and drop it right onto the canvas. You can see that with the Move tool, as I go over the image, a blue line curves around the image. This indicates that this is an element that I get to move around. So just by clicking on it and then dragging it around, I'm moving things. This applies to shapes, text, images, and effects. It's a really helpful tool, and the shortcut to get it is just hitting V on your keyboard. So if I'm on something else, I hit V, you can see that it jumps straight to the Move tool. Now, when you're on the Move tool, there are certain things that you can do. So you can obviously move your element around, you can align them, and you can transform them. So if you're using the text tool, you can't really do those same things. So that's why it's probably the most used tool in Photoshop, because you use it between everything. So let's try making this image a little smaller. We can have it selected and then hit Command or Control T on your keyboard. So one more time, Command or Control T. And then I'm going to get these boxes around my image. You can tell that it's being selected for transforming because of this giant X across our element. And again, anything that I show you right here can be applied to a text layer, a shape layer, a path layer. So just by dragging the corners, I can resize my image. Same thing here. This will maintain the original size of the image, so feel free to move it around. Another thing that you can do is hovering your mouse close to the top of these points. You can see that it changes when I do that. And with that, I get to rotate my image. So clockwise or counterclockwise. You can see on my cursor, it tells me the exact degree. And if I wanted to be on a specific degree, I could just type it in this box right here. So let's say 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 0 degrees. So anything at all, you just do that and you can rotate your image. In terms of position, we do have X and Y coordinates. As a beginner, you wouldn't really use that. Visually, it's more efficient, but if you wanted to, you can just position it exactly by the pixel on your canvas. Okay, and if you clicked away by accident, just click the image again, Command and Control T. So what else can we do over here? We do have the width and the height currently locked. So when I try to change the size of this, you can see that I can't really squish anything. And that is because we have this locked. So if I click on this once, I can now squeeze my image because the ratio no longer matters. Let's hit Command or Control Z to undo that and get this locked again. I can also go over the letters, go left or right to do basically the same thing I'm doing here, but from a different method. You can also use your arrow keys to move them by smaller increments or just type in any number. So let's say 5%. So when I try to resize my image, you can see that it does that by the corners. So every other corner except this guy is moving as I'm trying to move this around. But if I want a different reference point, say the top one, the right one, or anything, you can see these little boxes around this guy. I could just click on one of them. So now this guy is my new reference point. And just like that, we can change the reference point wherever we want it to be. Notice this circular target thing, that's what you're looking for. And if you want it to be at the center, just click the center. And that's where it should be by default. If you don't want the center point, the reference points, just turn off this checkpoint and you don't have to worry about that. And this will just by default go to the opposite end of where you are moving it. Now in terms of transforming, we do have some special stuff over here right next to the check mark and the cancel mark. If you click on this, you'll notice that your grid changed immediately. So now we have this situation. You can choose the way you can see these grids. You can add more points, more columns, more rows. The more rows and columns you have, the more precise your transformations can be. So this right here is pretty standard, and basically I could squish and swiggle the insides of this based on the grid. So I can't do anything with the edges here because that was for the previous transform options we had. But now if I just click on this end, I could kind of do this. Make it kind of 3D, move it around. If you have like a gradient thing and you want it to look like a liquid substance, this is where you would come to do that. When you create a curve, notice how we got these two lines coming from the corner. When you grab this, you can change the edge. The more you take it out, the more intense that curve is going to be. So notice this curve. But if you push it in, it's less intense. Pull it in all the way, you're going to get a straight line. And this is a case with all the other ones, so hard to grab it sometimes. Looks like that. If you hold down Option on your keyboard and click on it, you can move the corner itself. Alright, so let me hit Command or Control Z, get my default grid back. There we go. When I hold down Command, notice how I'm getting the option to add another row and column. It's the same thing as up here. Let's say I want another row. I should bring my cursor to the edge, and then I could add a middle row here. So just click, let go, and you got yourself another row. If I hold down Command in the center and not at the corners, I will get a row and a column, which I could add in for a more precise transformation. So notice how the lines here are more detailed compared to the center. This is because of what we had. So when I move this corner, you can see how not everything is moving. I could just work with this tiny section of my work and get some transformations going. So this is the same thing as the command thing. You can just split the warp horizontally, vertically, or just do one where there's both, or just hold down Command. We have some grid options. If I hit default, it just brings me back to what I had. I could make it a 3x3, 4x4, and or a 5x5. You can also customize this to the way you want it, say 7 columns and 3 rows. You can do that easily. Command 0. And then this is where you get to decide what kind of warping you're doing to your image. So when you're on custom, you're doing a combination of all of the ones below. But these are things that you would use for something like a shape or a text, not necessarily for an image like this. But since I have it here already, let's go over what each of these do. So when you do arc, it just creates an arc from the bottom. It gives us this shape. I could still move the top to have it go the other way and decide how much of a curve I want. Command or Control Z. Then we have an arc lower or upper, same thing, but the bottom, as you can see, remains intact. So lower would just be the same thing, but on the other end. And with any of these warps, you still can add the row and the column. So this applies to all of these. Then we have a double arc, which lets you get one unified arcing. We have bulging, which makes it rounder in the center. Looks like that. We have a shell low. These are just different shapes you can explore. The opposite end for upper, turn it into a flag, a wave on the inside, a fish shape, and we still have the controls to change this up. We have a rise, fisheye effect, which you can just grab the point there. This is something you might use. We have an inflate option, a squeeze option, a twist option. There we go, whichever direction you want it to go. And then a cylinder option. So you may be wondering, apart from text and other stuff, why else would you want to use the warps? This one in particular for the cylinder warping is really good for mock-ups. So say you have a soda can and you're trying to warp your design onto that soda can. The can itself is shaped like a cylinder. So you would do this and then simply change the width of it and match it to how tall your soda can is. So it makes things a lot more simpler for those type of purposes. We go back to, let's do wave. And then over here we have some guide options. The guide options here are talking about the blue lines you see on the image. You can change the color if you want, how visible they are and how thick they are. Unless you have to, just leave them as the default because you do need to see what changes you're making. And then this right here just switches the way your warping is happening. So just the orientation. So if it was warping this way horizontally, we can have it warped vertically. Then bending is the same thing as that white box. So if I just move this around, you can see bend is changing up here. The height is about the height of your work. And then we have the volume. So that sort of stuff. You can then click this to bring it back to default and undo everything. And once you're done, hit the check mark. So those are your special warping effects. We do have some general transform options, which you can get again with the move tool, then Command or Control T. But this one, you have to right click on the image and then you get that option. So we have place, which is what we did first when we dragged in our work. Placing it would just have you unselected for transformation. You can do the same thing via enter on your keyboard, whichever you prefer. Then we have cancel the operation. Then we have scale, which decides on how large your image is. We have rotate, lets you rotate it. Skew, basically squishing it or making it bulkier on one end. This is again good for mock-ups. Say you have a TV screen that's tilted to the right, you would want to match your design according to that tilt. Then we have perspective. Perspective is more justified than skew. Skew can get a little bit distorted, but I would say perspective is a lot better if you have like a well-defined rectangular shape. And then distort just lets you do anything you want. So it doesn't really care if it's justified, if the ratio makes sense. You just get to move your artwork in weird ways. And then we have rotate 180 degrees, 90 clockwise, counterclockwise. Warp brings you back to that menu we were looking at earlier. We have the split options, which is the same thing as this, or holding down Command. Then we have some toggle guides, which hides those blue lines that you can configure with this. Then we have flip horizontally or flip vertically, and that's about it. I'm gonna reset the warp and then just cancel to get back my original image. So that's all the transformation. There is another tool in the move tool. Whenever you see this tiny triangle in the corner, that indicates that there's another tool besides the tool you're seeing right now. So notice how the zoom tool doesn't have that tiny triangle, but a lot of the other ones do. So when you right click on the move tool, you can see there's the artboard tool. The shortcut is also V. But when you hit V, you're going to be directed to the move tool first. So just right click and grab your artboard. So when we were first setting up our document, remember that we checked a box for artboards, and those are essentially different canvases. So this right here is one canvas that I have, and if I click on it, I could move the entire thing with my artboard tool. All right, when I click it, I can move it around, and then notice these pluses on the edges of my artboard. That lets me create one on the right, hit Command Z, one on the top, one at the bottom, and so on forth. Hit Command 0. When you export your work and say you have 7 artboards, that's going to be 7 pages of art that you are exporting from Photoshop. But it's important for you to not confuse this with layers. Layers are within one artboard. Artboards are within your project. So it's a bigger concept. Now with artboards, you can create some presets for yourself. So if you have this special dimension that you'd like to reuse, you could just define it here, then hit the plus sign, and then you can just jump straight into Photoshop and start from that artboard size. But if you want to use a well-known size, you can go on here. You can see we have iPhones, we have Apple Watches, and all the other stuff that you might need. And when you click on one of them, with the current artboard selected, it changes that to the actual size. So iPhone 10 is 1125 pixels by 2436. So that's why it's a lot larger. This is predefined by Photoshop. But if you wanted to, you can still change the width or the height of your artboards. The next thing is the background color. By default, it's white. You can do black, transparent, or hit other for the color picker to show up. If you wanted a different unit, you can just type out pixels and put in maybe centimeters, inches, or whichever other unit you prefer. I'm going to go back to logo, which is a regular square, 600 pixels. We do have some other options up here, which is making your artboard into landscape or portrait. But since I have a square, those are being grayed out. We can add a new artboard based on these things. If I click on this, I will get this loaded into my mouse, and I can just click once and maybe put it right next to my current artboard. Then we have the orientation, which I could justify them at the center, top edges, distribute the width, and all that other stuff. This is for when you have multiple artboards. I only have one at the moment. Then we have some options right here, which by default, all of them are selected. So that's the artboard tool. Going back to the move tool, there was one other thing that I wanted to show you guys, and that is when you just have an element on your canvas. You may have noticed these things, the same as the artboards, we have a preset option to make some presets defined for this tool. You wouldn't really use it for the move tool since it's a pretty general thing. But you can turn this on to see the transform controls, which is the same thing that we were looking at earlier. And then you can align it to the center of your document, the edges, top, bottom. Center it completely means pressing these two, and then there's more options down here. So if you had multiple things, so say I had 2 things, I'm going to hold down Option on my keyboard, click and drag to duplicate my 2 elements, click and drag both of these elements. I can move them both at the same time. So the second one just went under the first one. And then again, we have some default stuff at the corner. We have auto select turned on. Make sure this is on. It makes things a lot easier. And then you can go based off a layer or a group. We'll learn about layers and groups in another lesson. But that is basically how you get to use the move tool and the artboard tool. Pretty self-explanatory. Throughout the entire course, I will be using these tools interchangeably, and it will be used for basically anything we do in Photoshop. So now let's move on to our next tools and see what else Photoshop has to offer. Now, before we jump into the more complex tools, such as the three tools below the Move tool, the Marquee, the Lasso, and the Quick Selection tool, we're going to look at some of the smaller tools that only do either one thing or have very minimal features. Now, the Marquee, Lasso, and Quick Selection are all about selecting something in your images. So that's why it can get tricky, because we have to make sure we're selecting the right thing. Our edges are smooth. Maybe we want to remove something from an image and just do more advanced things. So that's why I'm going to skip over these for now and jump into our crop tool, which is fairly simple to use. Now, crop tool, as the name suggests, is just for cropping. Whether you have an empty file like this, you can simply click and drag to make another artboard on top of your file. Similarly, you can grab that artboard and just crop it into a smaller size. And if you already have an image, I'm going to go to my layers. I have two pulled in already. I can use my crop tool to only grab a certain part of that image. So it's a fairly simple thing to use. When you long click on your crop tool, you do see some other stuff. So I have this image right here, and it does have a shape that can be cropped out using the perspective tool. Now, one thing to notice is that we made this document with the artboard selected, and you can see that my first layer is within an artboard. So when I want to say just crop out this sign, I will run into some issues. So I end up moving the entire image, and when I go outside of the canvas, I make another artboard. So that's where things can get a little bit tricky, but it's not that big of a deal, because if we make another project with this checked off, we will not have that same problem. So let's go over here and just copy our layer. Just do Command or Control C, Command or Control V. So now I do not have it within an artboard. You can see the difference right over here. And now I can crop this as I please. So let's grab the tool. If I were to only isolate San Diego, I could just click and drag. Once I'm happy with it, check mark, and that is my new photo. But the problem here is that there is some perspective action being done here. So it's not flat straight to the camera. And whatever I do, I'll end up missing parts. I'll end up adding parts that I don't need. So that's where the perspective crop tool comes in handy. So when you long click, perspective crop tool, it starts the same way. So you have this square thing, but now I'm going to bind it to the two corners. Once I let go, you can see that I have a different result. I could simply grab one of these edges and follow along the perspective of my object. You can zoom in, make sure it's all nice and tidy. I believe this is the corner. There we go. I'm holding down the space bar to move my canvas and my mouse to just move it around. You can use your trackpad to zoom in and out, or just use the zoom tool, which I'll show you how to do in a second. So once I have my setup, I can hit the check mark, and there is my image. So I was able to crop it without bringing in all those unnecessary things. So that's what the perspective crop tool is for, and the crop tool, simple to use. Now the next tool is called the slice tool. This may sound familiar to you if you use Illustrator, InDesign. And essentially what it does, and as the name suggests, is that it slices your image into different parts that you could later export. So if you have done one of those carousel works on Instagram, you can see how when you scroll, when you swipe on that carousel, all the images seem to be intact, but they are different things. So essentially they use the slice tool to turn one image into 3 slices that, if you were to put them together, would result in the original image. So up here you can set it to normal, fixed aspect ratio, or the fixed size. I'm going to go ahead and do that Instagram example where we're going to have 3 identical slices for one image. So aspect ratio 1:1, and now let's just hold down shift. If you did not put an aspect ratio, but you want to make sure that it's still a square, and then let go when you're done. So you can see that it cut my work into two identical squares, one rectangle and one longer rectangle. Now if I long click, we have slice select tool, and I could either divide this into more sections, manually just type in one on one, and this would be my work. I could also move the slices. You can see that I'm making even more. And then when I export this, say I'm happy with this, export, say for legacy, I have these separate slices that I get to export. This is more of an artistic thing, as I mentioned, but if you ever wondered how they did those type of carousel works, it's via a tool like this. Once we have that, we have the option to create a preset for the different slices. And then we have some things that are like bring to front and to back. This is the hierarchy within these slices. You may not need these at the moment, but that's what they're for. So this brings your current selected slice to the front. This takes it one below the front, one before the last one, and the last one. You can also hit promote for it to come like one level up until it reaches the front. And then that was a divide, some alignment stuff, and then we have hide auto slices. It hides the stuff that it automatically did for you. And you can just give each of these a name. So instead of slice 5, it could be like logo slice or something. And that's about it. So the slice tool, pretty cool. And that is all the tools within this button. Right below it, we have something called frames. This is for when you want to create templates and just need some placeholders. So let's say I was to send this photo to someone else to put their own logo in. To guide them as to where they should put their photos, I could use that frame tool. So just click and drag, and that right there tells them that they should put their photo right over there. We can also do a round one, and that creates a circular frame. Now, how does the person on the other end actually put in their own photos? You may have noticed that we're getting different icons at the bottom right of each of these. So these are the frames, these are the layers original contents. And the ones to the left, the two things, are just indicating that these are frames, but the ones on the right are actually smart objects. Now, smart objects are a great way for you to not only edit your images, but keep track of exactly what you're doing and have the ability to go back to a certain setting and adjust their value. So in this occasion, say we gave that other person this exact Photoshop file. Because it's a smart object, all they have to do is double click on that image and they'll be brought inside of the image itself. And this is where they can click and drag their new photo, or maybe, I don't know, make a change here, whatever they want to do. But just the mere ability of going from our original project to the image itself is only being done because of that smart object. Now, if I were to copy this same image, Command or Control C, Command or Control V, and see how this does not have that icon. If I double click here, the only thing that comes up is this layer styles panel. I cannot go into the image itself. So smart objects is something we're going to look at later for mockups, image editing, and so much more. You'll come across it at least once when you're using Photoshop, but try to use it as much as you can when you're making substantial amounts of editing. Okay, so that's the frame tool. As you can see, there's not much going on here. The next tool is the eyedropper tool. So this one just selects a certain color for you to use. So when you long click, there are a bunch of other stuff that I'm going to show you later. But the first one works just by click and dragging. So this is a color that I just picked, my other color. If I am not sure which color I want, I could just click and hold and drag and see what color I want to sample. Then let go, and it's going to be here ready for me to use. Up here we have the sample size. So 5 by 5 average looks at a relatively smaller range of pixels. So it's really concentrated into those tiny colors, but if I increase that amount, it's going to be relatively the same color. It's not as precise. So that's what sample size means. And then point sample is a singular point, singular pixel. 3 by 3 means that it takes 3 pixels across and 3 pixels from the top, finds the average, and gives you the sample. So you can use any of these depending on what you're doing. And then we can sample, tell it to sample what. So all of the layers that you have, the layers that had no adjustments, the current layer that you're on, or current layer and below. So the layers are the things you see here. If you cannot see your layers panel, window, layers. So are you asking it to only take a sampling from this photo, the photo above it, all the photos, only one photo? That's where you set that thing. And then show sampling ring is the circular thing that we found before. So that's just a visual preference. When we long click, we have color sampler tool. So when I click once, you can see that I can see the, let me make another one here. I can compare some of the colors and maybe try something similar. You can see the RGB values and the CMYK. You can make multiple of these samples. You can see that they're labeled, so 1, 2, 3. So once you have all these samples, you can make some color choices. Maybe choose a different color, see if everything's in the right range. That's the sort of thing you might use it for. But this would be a more advanced tool. I'm just showing you how it would work. Long click, we have the ruler tool. So I'm going to go back here for a second just because it's a lot more tidy. The ruler tool, as the name says, lets you measure things. So how tall, how long is this top part of the sign? You can see on the top right, I have some measurements. So the width is 257, the height is 16. I didn't really set a height. You can use it to measure things, so pretty cool. When you let go and click and drag, you're making a new selection, so bear that in mind. You can straighten that layer based off that ruler. So if I set the line at which I want the image to be straightened on, I would make that line. Straighten layer, you can see now this line that I made is lying flat. So this is especially good with like geometric photos, any buildings, architectures, and many other stuff. Long click, we have the count tool. It basically lets you count parts of your image. So let's say you have an image full of balloons. You want to see how many balloons you got. You can do 1, 2, 3, 4. The numbers are quite tiny, but you can change your colors and increase the size up here. So let's make this 6 and make this red. You can see they got quite large. Let's make the label 12. You can see the size got a lot bigger. I'm going to count, say, the screws. And another reason why you might want to use this is when you're sharing a document and you're trying to communicate with another designer, you can be like, look at point 12. There's a problem with it. We need it to be fixed. So that's one of the functionalities. You can make different groups. So this one could be for imperfections, another one could be for suggestions and all that stuff. We know that currently we have 14 counts. Then we can make another group based on what we just counted. Then when we're done, clear. So those are some of the lesser intense tools on Photoshop. So in the next lesson, I'm going to start by the selection tools, which we kind of skipped. So those would be these 3. And there's a lot that you can do with it, especially with the integration of AI. So it's important that you have the latest version and that you know how you could best use these tools to, in this case, select something. Now, selection is something really big inside Photoshop because at some point or another, you either have to select a person, an object, select one part to color in, add a text in, and it's just a really helpful technique to master this early on in the course. Now, as we move forward with the course, we're going to use selections in tons of different ways, so be sure to follow along with the examples that I have download the resources, and this way you will get some practice before moving on to more complex lessons. So right below the move tool, we have something called the marquee tool. You can see that it has a tiny triangle in the corner, meaning that if I long click, I will get more options that do this basic functionality. Now the marquee tool makes a selection based on the shapes that you can see, and then using that selection, you can either mask it, duplicate it, take it out, do anything else you want to do with it. So let's grab the rectangular marquee. I have this image opened. It's in the resource folder. We used this last lesson. And very simply, I could click and drag to make my marquee selection. Once I let go, you can see that it's like marching ants going around. And I could just move this around. It won't really crop out anything until I ask Photoshop to do that. So once you have this, you can right click to either deselect it, select the inverse, which means everything around what you just selected, feathering the edges, select and mask. I'll get to these in the layers lesson. Save selection, make work path, and this is where we're going to focus on for now. So we can copy this selection. So once I click that, you can see that I made a copy of my selection. Now I can use this to maybe move it around, do something else with it. But it's a very basic tool for now. And what you can also do is go through the other shapes. If you want to grab something that's circular, something that is one line, like maybe half the photo, then the other way would be like the vertical version. And then again, you can cut that part, transform it like we learned already, and do a bunch of other stuff. Up here, you have the same preset options for all of the tools have this essentially. So if you have one dimension for selection that you'd like to use more than once, you can just save it right here. I'm gonna call it that, and there we go. So instead of click and dragging, making sure that it's the exact same size, I could just grab this drop down menu, just click on it, and you can see that it made that blue outline for my preset. Now the other stuff here is not like the other tool. Basically, you can combine two selections and modify the things that you have selected right now. So let's delete this extra layer. I'm going to right click, deselect, so I don't see that marching ants anymore. And we ended up removing this bit of our work. We hit Command or Control Z until we don't have that layer. There we go. And then we can deselect like so. Okay, so let's grab it again. And using my rectangular tool, I'm going to grab this tiny piece. But say later I changed my mind and I want to add more to this without having to hit Command or Control Z to undo my selection. I can then click on this second one where it's two filled squares next to each other. And then you can see there's a plus next to my cursor. Click and drag, let go, and you can see now I have a bigger but combined selection. The next one, what it does is that it subtracts from that selection. So let's go on that. Say I don't want this text to be in there. There's a minus next to my cursor. Click and drag, let go, and now that part is gone. The last one is intersection. So I have my first selection here. There's an X next to my cursor. And say I make another selection here. The part where it overlaps is going to be the remaining selection. Let go, and there it is. So that's all that this does. We will be using these often later on. Feathering, again, I'll get to this in a separate lesson. And then we have some styles, which is just about fixed ratio. So 1:1, I can only make a square. If I do 2:1, that's going to be a different story. You can also do fixed size, so type in the pixels. I have, say, 30 by 64 pixels, and that's exactly what I'm going to get. Then lastly, select and mask for a different lesson. So that's our most basic method of selecting. But of course, not everything is that geometrical. It's not always a perfect rectangle or a perfect circle for us to select. So that's where the lasso tool comes in. It literally looks like a lasso, and you can draw selections more freely. So if I just click and start drawing around, you can see that I can make any shape. And then when I let go, we have the marching ants again. So this right here is my new selection. If I were to right click, layer via copy, I now have this select it out. Let's hit Command or Control Z. Up here, we have the exact same thing, the presets, the modifications, the feathering, and then we have select and mask. So that's all there is to lasso tool. It's just like the one before it, but it's a more free-form way of selecting. When I long click, we have some other stuff. So this brush, it's a relatively new brush. Basically what it does is that it allows you to brush in an area that you want to select without it being way too free like the lasso tool or one of the geometric shapes, and without automatic detection, which is right below it. I'll show you guys that in a bit. But just like the brush tool, you can first of all decide the size and make this a little smaller. And the hardness, I'll go over what these are in a further lesson, but for now I just want to show you what these do. So we have add or subtract and the presets that we've had for all the other tools, and just opacity. So with the add selected, because you need to have something before you can subtract from it, I'm just gonna grab the text here. So you can see I'm just very freely drawing in my area. Once I let go, I can now use the subtract. So maybe I grab that and just clean this up a bit. If you don't like the color purple, you can go in this thing and just choose a different color. It's up to you. I'm gonna go back to magenta. And now that you have the selection, what can you do with it? So just like the other tool, the marquee tool, if you go back to it, you can see this turns into the marching ants. And anytime you see this, that means that you're about to make a change within this area. So I could make another copy like we did. I could color it in with a brush tool. I could use the generative fill to remove the text completely, and so much more. For now, just grab the brush with the settings, so your size, hardness 100, and just a color black. Then just draw this in. So you can see I can only make changes within the marching ants section. So that's the selection brush tool. We'll go more in depth in the next lessons. The next tool is the polygonal lasso tool. So this one is for things that have corners. And in our case, that's perfect because we have a square sign. I'm just going to right click, hit deselect so I don't see those marching ants anymore. Now with my mouse, you should see this similar character. I'm going to start at a corner, click once, and now you can see there's a circle next to my shape, my cursor. When I drag away, you can see there's this line following me. So now I need to decide where's my next corner or my next turn. I will go to the next corner, click, and now I have another one. So the first line is set and kind of nailed to the areas that I'm clicking. Third one, click, click, and then to close it and get those marching ants, we have to go to the first area we clicked. So you can see when I go over it, I'm getting a circle. That means I'm about to close this selection. Let go, and now I have my marching ants. So I can do the same thing, maybe make a copy, delete that part, do whatever we need to do. And once again, we have the same stuff up here, just like the settings we have with the marquee tool. The next one is a magnetic lasso tool. So basically Photoshop will detect the edges for you and it's looking for contrast. So notice that everything up here is the exact same thing except for these four things. So first we have the width, the contrast, and the frequency. Now using the basic settings, I did not change any of that. I'm going to attempt to get the edge here. So notice how it's making these lines and I'm not even clicking anything yet. At some point it drags itself towards the black end. Other times when I'm facing away, like if I'm here, it will grab some other corners and I didn't have to click anything. So that's the magnetic lasso tool. If you wanted to be more sensitive and more careful about the area it selects, you would have to mess around with the contrast and the frequency. So if I make the contrast 100%, let's click one at the corner. You can see how it's a lot less wiggly and it goes straight to the darker areas. Even if I do this, it's not going to happen because there's not that much contrast in this blue area. Now, if you're not familiar with the word contrast, it's when there's a big difference between two objects, especially in terms of lightness and color. So if you look at this blue area, we have this little white cloud. You can barely tell that guy is there because the lightness in this white and in this blue, it's kind of similar. So when we ask Photoshop to detect the cloud, it will have a hard time, especially if it's not as sensitive. But if you look at this black sign and the blue background, you can clearly draw the line at which they separate. So these two objects have high contrast with each other. This white dot and this blue thing do not. You can barely tell they're there. So that's what I mean by contrast. If I bring this down to 1, I can pretty much do anything. I can grab all of these guys and Photoshop will not care because it's not looking for that divide. And then frequency is how often it samples. So let me go back to the default, which was around 10%. Bring this all the way down to like 7. Start clicking. You can see how it's sampling less. It gave me a relatively good selection. Bring it all the way up. It's going to be really sensitive. So you see it's like 100 lines as I'm going through. It's sampling a lot more. Then when you're done, hit that and you got yourself a selection. Now, why would you want to change frequency or contrast? The main reason is in how your subject is. So if you have a dark blue ball in front of a white background, you do not need that much frequency because it's pretty easy to sample. But if you have, let's say, a person wearing a blue shirt in front of a blue background, you do need Photoshop to be more sensitive with its selection and detection. So those are some reasons to keep in mind. Next we have tablet pressure. So this is if you're using Photoshop with a tablet. I doubt any of you guys are. But if you were, you can turn this on and then with the pen, whether it's Apple Pencil or a Wacom tablet, the more you press, the bigger and more sensitive your brush is going to be. And then the width is just talking about this. And then that's pretty much the selection tools. Now, what if you want Photoshop to detect your shape with one click? That's where you would go. So this is actually a good thing. If you accidentally made a selection and you want to get out of it, just hit escape on your keyboard and then you're done. Okay, so this right here is called the quick selection tool. So you click once or just roughly the area that you want selected and Photoshop will detect that object for you. So we have a bunch of things. If you long click, you can see it. I will actually start with the top, which is the object selection tool. Now this is actually pretty suitable for our object right now because it's a predetermined shape. It doesn't have that much of, I would say, curves. Just imagine this and a human body. A human body has more curves, more finer details to select. That's why, unless it has really high contrast with its background, you would not be using this for a person. But for our sign here, this is actually perfect. I will simply click and drag my object, let go, and you can see that it pretty much determined this high contrast area, but it kind of struggled with the wall here. And that is when we can use the options up here. So I want to remove this wall from my selection. I will go to subtract mode, click it once, and then just grab parts of the wall. And there we go. So now we have selected our sign only. There are some little selections here, but that's where you would jump in with a brush to deal with it. So maybe we can go back to our selection brush tool, go to subtract and just paint over that tiny area. Once you're done, go back. And now I only have my sign. Right click, let's make a copy. And now I have an isolated thing. Okay, so that's the object selection tool. Up here, apart from these, we have object finder, which is actually pretty cool. You can see that this guy was moving. It was trying to find the objects in your photo. So I'm going to try this again and see if it can find it for me. And there we go. So now I didn't have to go back and edit it. And if you hover over it, it will tell you exactly what it selected. If it did not select parts of your object, you can click and drag again, using the options up here to fine-tune your selection. And then this right here just refreshes the object finder. If for some reason it can't find the sign and it selects this thing, you can just refresh it, have Photoshop analyze your image again, and then select that one more time. Then we have all the objects that it can find. When I click it, there's only one object, so that's pretty good. But a lot of times it may select some other stuff, maybe a person in the background. Since it's just looking for objects, you would have to tell it which object to focus on. So if there were two signs, you would use the subtract one to just remove that second object from the selection. This is just some preferences, so the color, the outline, opacity. It's talking about this middle box. We have the mode. You can go with the lasso tool, which is what we looked at earlier, or the rectangular one. Sample all the layers. If you had multiple layers, this would apply. Hard edge is talking about the edge of your selection. And since it's an object, you do want to have this turned on, unless you have like a fluffy ball that you're trying to select, but that wouldn't need the object selection tool. And this last one, I believe, is just some feedback. So it's just to provide Photoshop with some feedback on this tool. We do have the option here for selecting subject. This can be done automatically by Photoshop without you having to click and drag anything. So for this one, we can actually look at it in the other tool. When you long click, there's the quick selection tool. Now for this one, I'm going to go to another image where we have a human subject, so something more complex and something that you would use this particular tool a lot for. All right, so right away you're on the plus because you need to make a selection. You can just click and drag and you can see how it jumps to the corners of your subject. And I could just bring my brush closer to the edges that it's not detecting. I'm still holding on my cursor, I didn't let go yet. Once I have a good selection, I can let go. Once you see the marching ants, that means you have a finalized selection. Now I ended up taking this part by accident. Let's go to the minus version and just go over it until it jumps backwards to the actual edge of that person's neck. Let go, and now I have a better selection. The next one is the size of your brush. The spacing, the hardness, we'll look at these in the brush lesson. Again, sample all layers, we only have one layer. Enhance the edge, which is really important for human subjects, especially if they have hair. We do want those finer, rounder edges to be considered. And now the select subject. Let's deselect this and just have Photoshop find our subject for us. So in the drop-down menu, we have device and then cloud. So as the parenthesis says, you can choose which one you prefer. I will go to device for now, hit select subject, and let's see how Photoshop selects our human. So you can see it did a good job, but it did miss our laptop. Let's deselect, try the cloud version. So this selected the entire thing. As it said, this will be more detailed. So instead of going in with my brushes, Photoshop can just select this for me. I could just right click and make our copy. And now I have a isolated human subject. Now for areas like the hair, this will be a separate lesson, but you can see that it did a rather good job with like the finer details. But to fix this completely, we do need to use the masking, which is right over here. And that's also going to be a very helpful lesson. We also have some stuff over here that it picked up by accident. But overall, it's still pretty good. I'm gonna hit Command or Control 0 to zoom back out. Our last tool for today is the Magic Wand tool. Now this one, you just click once and it magically finds your subject. So it's pretty quick. Let's click once on our subject and it selects a wide range of things. I think on this one it would be better. Click once. It's using a lot for tolerance, so let's lower this a lot and just click until I have my subject. So I don't use this tool that often, but you can see how it's pretty quick in finding some large areas for you. You can see the details it selects for that shirt. We can use the stuff up here to add or remove from it, the sample, average, so how big of an area does it detect at a time. Let's go 101. can see it's selecting bigger areas. Pretty big. Tolerance is how sensitive it is to the details. So when you increase the tolerance, you can see when I click, it's just grabbing the entire image. The marching ants are at the corner. But if I lower the tolerance, it will, let's right click, it will select smaller and more detailed areas because it's more sensitive. So the lower the tolerance, the more sensitive it is. The higher the tolerance, the more it doesn't care. So it goes up to 255. That's in terms of all the colors. And then the rest are pretty self-explanatory. This is the same thing as we saw earlier. And then we have select and mask. So those are your selection tools. Pretty interesting stuff. We will, as I said, use these more often as we move along the lesson. But for now, we know how to select things. In this lesson, we're going to go over brushes and layers. This will be a two-part lesson because these two kind of work together, and it will really help me tell you how the whole layering works within Photoshop. Now, layers are essentially pieces of paper that you place on top of each other, and the more you add, the more details and the more flexibility you have over the way your image looks. So one layer could be dedicated to some filters, other layer could be for some colors, and that's how you build up things in Photoshop. So I just made a new document. You can see that on my layers panel, which is right over here. If you're not seeing this, go to Window and click on Layers. We will always start with a layer called background that is locked. So notice this lock and everything else will be grayed out. It doesn't matter if this is a white box, an image, a cartoon, anything you bring in will start this way. Now, if I unlock this by clicking once on the lock, you can see everything else comes back. So now I have some stuff to work with here. And most importantly, I can start editing this layer. The first thing you can do is change the name of your layer. So instead of layer 0, I can double click on the name and call this something else. Once I have that written out, hit enter, and there is my new layer. Now on this layer, I could start adding things to it. So let's go ahead and get our brush tool, which is right over here. Click once on it, and you will see this circle, which may be a different size. Might be this tiny, might be this big, depends on what setting you had before. And then when you right click on the canvas, this is how I got this panel. So let's actually go over it. Size, either type in the pixel number or just change the slider here. One thing you can also do is use your front and back bracket keys to increase it by one increment or decrease it. Hit the right bracket, you can see that I'm making this bigger. Hit the left bracket, it will make it smaller. This is on your keyboard. So let's right click again. Next we have hardness. So hardness is talking about the edge of that brush. Is it very soft or very hard? So let me just show you visually the difference. I'm going to increase my size until I get a nice color. Let's click away. And right here I have the color black. We learned about colors already, so you can just double click and get a different color, but I will go with a bright one so we can tell the difference. With this in the front, I will make one click on my canvas. Once I let go, I have this red shape. Let's right click and lower the hardness all the way to 0. Now you can see that my brush size changed, but I didn't really go over the size. That is because most of it is this feathering effect. So in theory, these two circles are the same size, but this one has a softer edge. What's happening here is that from this part till around here is that soften effect happening. But here it looks like that. So that's the difference. I will now go back to my brush tool right over here. Right click again. Now instead of just hard or soft, you can choose a middle ground that's a little bit softer, and this really depends on what you're trying to draw in. If you have a tablet and you would like to paint, this is the tool that you would be using most often. But using the brush tool, you can also make a lot of masking, which we'll get into in this lesson a bit later. So these are the general brushes. You do have some libraries on how the edges of your brushes look like. So this was soft round, which is this, hard round, that. If you scroll down, we have soft round pressure size, hard round pressure size, and this one, it's mostly for the tablet because you can't really determine the pressure with your mouse on your computer, but that's what the pressure is talking about. We also have some artistic stuff like pencil. You can see that looks like a pencil. Let me make it a little bigger. It looks like that. If we scroll down, we got some special effects stuff, some wet media stuff. Let's go for one of these. So this is a blending brush actually. So I can blend this red into this white. And it looks like I'm painting. Blend these more. If I blend the whole thing, I get this soft pink color. So think of it as a regular paintbrush. I'm hitting Command or Control Z to undo. If I scroll down, I got more stuff like wood. It's a little smaller. Gives us this woody effect. So if I have like a brown with a lighter brown spots, I could use this brush to make the, the wooden pattern. In Photoshop, we have raindrops, snow and rain, a leaf design. That's snow and rain. And a lot more. If you want, you can import your own libraries. Just by going over here, we can import our brushes. So on the internet, there's tons of libraries for you to download. Let's say you wanted a special effect, maybe oil pastels. There's oil pastel brushes on the internet for you to download. And then you can paint in Photoshop with pastels. You can also export your own brush. I'll show you how to make a custom brush in a further lesson. But this brush panel is pretty important. You can rename a brush, delete it, show what you see here. So the tip, the name, so you can see it's showing us a tip here and a stroke. We can change our default brushes, import, export, get more brushes, convert legacy tool presets, and show legacy brushes. So legacy basically is bringing a new set of brushes from the older versions of Photoshop. So you can see that we didn't have this tab before, but now we do. So let me just go to one, like for example, flat angle, low bristle. That's one of the legacy brushes. For more detailed work, essentially, we have watercolors. You can see it even has the texture. If I go on it again, I can darken my coloring just as you would with normal paint. We have some pastels. We were just talking about that. Right click. Got plenty of more. Some chalk if you need it. Even grass shapes. So if you like painting, this is a place to do it. See, I got this nice grass shape. You can change the shape, the size of any brush that you see here. So that's how you do it. Another thing you can change is the direction. So right now, all my grass blades are facing up, but I could change the direction here and have them face this way. Or perhaps another way. So all of those changes can be done rather simply. Alright, so that's the brush panel. Now let's go back to layers, now that we know how to use the brush. Again, we'll use this in almost every lesson, so it's important for you to be familiar with it. I'm going to go back to hard round, which is what we have here. Let's increase the size. And now I want to get rid of this layer and start fresh. Select it. We can go ahead and first of all make a new layer because you can't have a layer panel with nothing in it. Click on this plus sign to make another layer. Now grab this and hit delete. Here we go. I could make more layers. It'll be layer 2, 3, 4, 5, as many as we need. If I want to delete more than one layer, grab the first one, hold down shift, grab the other ones, and then hit backspace or that trash icon in the bottom. You can also, let me hit Command Z, grab a few by holding down Command or Control. So let's grab 5, 3, and 1. Right click, we can delete the layers or hit backspace. And now I only have 2 and 4. Now let's try to do some stuff here. I'm going to hide layer 4, turn off this eyeball, and just work on my layer 2. Using my brush, I'm going to make a very simple line. Notice how my background is this checkered situation. This just shows that it's a transparent layer, meaning that right now the only thing on my layer is the red lines, and it's not like the previous layer where we had a white background. So if I turn this one on, layer 4, you can see you can't really tell the difference because there's nothing on that layer. Let's double click here and get like a blue color. And then on this layer, I will make another line. There we go. So now I have two things on top of each other. If I want the blue to go underneath the red, click and drag it right underneath. And there we go. If I want two reds, I could right click, duplicate the layer. And then maybe bring one below layer 4. Command or Control T to transform it. Let's maybe move it up here. Let's grab all our layers, bottom layer, shift, top layer. Using our move tool, click and drag it to the center. So you can see that everything is starting to connect in terms of the tools. Now if I want to make a change to my red layer, the one at the bottom, so it will be this one, you can see the blue outline telling you exactly where it is. I can use maybe the erase tool. It's the same thing as a brush tool, but it just removes instead of adds. I will now click and drag to erase parts of my brush. Now if I'm on this layer, I cannot erase the blue things. I can only remove the red things because the blue line is only on layer 4. So I can only do it like this. If I'm on layer 2, you can see I get an error because it's hidden and I cannot delete anything from layer 4. So you can see this sandwich effect, and I could just build on top of this maybe 50 layers, 10 layers with different things, and that would all be okay. All right, so going back to the layers panel, we can now decide how two things can blend on top of each other. So layer 2 is currently the top layer. It's on top of everything else. You can see here it's called, we have normal, opacity, fill. So the normal is talking about the blend mode. How is this top layer being blended with the bottom layers? So normal is just your regular thing, but if I click once, you can see we get this long menu of blending options. So if you go over each one, you can see how things start to change in interesting ways. I will go over what these mean. Let's actually make a new layer. I'm going to delete these for now. Use my brush to make two circles. One circle. Make another layer. Let's make a different circle. And put one on top of the other. Alright. I'll use my move tool, click and drag to move both of them towards the center. Let's actually use this one to align it, and I'll just move this guy a little bit like that. Alright, so we have these two circles. Let's go to layer 6 and call it red circle. Call the bottom one blue circle. Let's go over each one. So dissolve, you can see how the edges turned a little bit different. Let me zoom in actually. Using my trackpad. Pay attention to the edges right now. They look pretty normal, but dissolve kind of pixelates the edges. Now, between all of these, you can see there's these lines in between, and that is because each of these groups do a certain thing. So the top group, which consists of darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, and darker color, are all about darkening that top layer on top of the bottom layer. So darken, you can see that intersecting layer turns black, and it's the same thing for almost all of them. The second group is the opposite, so it's lighten. So now we can see we're getting a lighter color. The next layer is about building contrast. So right now you can't really tell with these two shapes, but when we do our healing lessons, these will be pretty evident. Then we have difference. What's the difference between these two colors? The exclusion, subtraction, and divide. Then we have hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. These, as long as you know what each group is for, using them in different situations can help you blend layers on top of each other. Now next to this is some pretty simple but interesting things like opacity. How much of that entire layer is visible? Right now it's at 100%. Lowering this will make it go away. Make it transparent. And you can click on this to get a slider or type in your percent manually. Now fill is talking about that color. So how deep is that color, that layer's color, and you can change it just like opacity. Now opacity is in terms of everything, so the lightness, the color, desaturation, but fill is about how much presence it has within that layer. Now we have some lock options here. At the beginning of the lesson, you may have noticed this. This will lock your layer, which means that if I grab my move tool, I can still move the blue one, but I can't move the red one because it's locked. If I unlock it, I can move it again. The next one is in regards to artboards. When you have your artboards, you can click and drag a layer onto another artboard, but doing this will prevent that from happening. So that's what this is for. Next, we have it to be locked in position, which means that I could still make changes to it, but I cannot move it with my move tool. Hence why it has that icon. Next, we have the brush lock, which means that I could move it, but I cannot make changes to it. You can see it makes a new layer. I can't do it on top of red circle anymore. And then finally, we have transparent pixels. So if I do this, I cannot paint on anything transparent, which is the exterior. If I just clicked on this to get black and white, I'm on red circle. I can paint the inside of that red circle only, not the areas around it. If I deselect that, I can do anything I want. So those are some of the lock features for the layers panel. Pretty cool stuff. Next, we have some things that we can do with more than one layers, which is grouping. So right now these are two individual layers, meaning that they're in no way connected. They just simply happen to be on top of each other. But what if I want to add an effect to two layers at the same time without having to combine them into one? That's where the group option comes in. So if you click this once on top of a layer, it will create this group. Now I can click and drag a layer to put it inside the group. You can see how it's indented to the right a bit. And now the red circle is inside group 1. I can put that second circle in there and do something like that. And now I can change the opacity for both or lock both of them. I can remove something by clicking and dragging it out, and now it's no longer indented. Now say I want to combine my two shapes. I don't want them to be separate anymore. That's where I get to merge the two layers. So right click on your top layer and hit merge down. And now I have one layer. I can no longer move them separately. And I wouldn't suggest you guys doing this unless you are certain, because you cannot undo the layers anymore. So say I did this, I went ahead and painted a few more stuff on it, I can no longer break the two apart. So let's hit Command or Control Z, right click. I also have some options to merge everything visible on my screen. Even the group got merged in. I have the option to hide a layer, rename it, flatten the image, which takes away everything, even the transparent background, and takes you back to square one, which was a locked background layer. So pretty simple stuff. We have some other things here as well. To keep this short, we mainly want to remember how to duplicate a layer by clicking this to copy one of the layers. You can also hit Command or Control D to duplicate. So there we go. You can hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard. You can see how my cursor turns into two. Click and drag on your layer and let go. We just made a duplicate. I can make multiple ones and do the same thing with the red layer. There we go. Now I can put everything within this group, or actually make a new group. So select everything and make a new group by hitting Command or Control G. And there's my group. Now I can maybe turn this into one full image by hitting merge group. Now once again, I'm not able to move things independently and get to do it as one solid unit. We're also able to add adjustment layers. So the reason why these are in here is because each of these will give you a separate layer to work with. So on top of group 2, let's add a brightness and contrast. Gonna make some changes. You can see how this is a new group. Let's actually choose an adjustment that's more visible. I will go to hue and saturation. So with this, made a new layer. Let's double click on this icon and just change the hue. Once I have this, this will be a separate layer to work with. So I can hide it, I can lock it, lower the opacity, and the logic is the same as everything else. Now just like layers, I can just click and drag this below. Since this adjustment is below my layer, it's not affecting anything. Adjustment layers only work when they're on top of a layer. So that's why when we move this around right below, my shapes are as they were before. If I move it up, you can see how the adjustment is being made. Let's delete this. We got some other stuff. These are all things that you will learn in the photography lessons. If you've edited a picture before, most of these words are familiar to you. But if not, don't worry about it. We'll come back to this in a further lesson. Now in the next lesson, I will show you how to work with layer mask. This was something we saw in the selection lesson as well. When we went over one of these, we saw select and mask. So mask refers to a masking layer, which you can also create down here. So I have this photo right here. We're going to get started on learning how to use layer mask now that we know what layers are. So with this image, we have the subject floating in the air. I plan to use the transformation tools, the selection tools, and the brush tool to add some elements behind the subject while keeping her still in front of that background. So first thing you'll notice is that there's a lot of white space. So let's transform our image so that it fits our canvas. Hold down Command or Control T until you see the outline like this. Hold down Alt or Option, click and drag until it reaches the edges of your canvas. Hit the check mark once you're done, and now we have a full image. What I'm going to do now is use any of the tools to select my subject. So you could go ahead and use the object selection tool because this is a pretty easy separation. You can see that since I have this turned on, it immediately finds the subjects for me, even considers these two as two separate objects. You can also go ahead and use the quick selection tool, the lasso tool, the magic wand tool, and just isolate that subject. So since this guy has it all figured out for me, I'm going to click once and then using the option we learned about, add on to my selection. So now I have my subject selected. If I were to right click on this layer via copy, that is what it looks like. But what if I don't want it to be a singular separated layer, but I want to maybe later bring up a little bit of the sky or some parts of her body that were removed by accident. So let's hit Command or Control Z and go back to the marching ants. Using any of the selection tools, once you've made your selection, you will notice that there's this layer mask down here, and it's the same thing up here. Now the difference is that when you click this, it will make a mask for you immediately. But if you want to refine your selection and then make that mask, we can hit Select and Mask. So before I go there, what are masks? So masking is basically where you tell Photoshop you want the certain parts of the image visible while hiding the rest of it. The good thing about masking is that you can use your brush tool to reintroduce parts of the image and get rid of the parts of the image in a very precise way. So you can use a 1 pixel brush to really fine tune those edges and then use that method to kind of have a way to go back and fix your mistakes. If you were to make a selection and just copy that layer, there isn't much room for you to go back and fix your mistakes. So this is where we're going to be brought in when we hit Select and Mask. It's a whole different page, but don't panic. You can always hit cancel down here or hit OK to just leave this and go back to your original canvas. So let's start with the things on the left. A lot of them should seem familiar to you. We went over them in the previous lesson. But let's take a look. The first one is our quick selection tool. And these are just ways for you to fine tune your selection. So that's the reason why we're brought here. So the quick selection tool, this tool is native to this panel only, this page. And that's the refine edge brush tool. So it essentially works like a brush tool, but the difference is that it really focuses on the edges of that subject. And then of course the more finer part. So it could be hair, fur, little bits of dust, whichever part of an image you are finding hard to select on your own. We have the brush tool, the object selection tool, the lasso tool, the hand tool, which is what you use to move your canvas, and the zoom tool. Now, when you're working on Photoshop, there are some shortcuts you need to know, especially with something like this, where you really have to zoom in and out multiple times, move your canvas around. So just as a reminder, you can use your trackpad, your mouse trackpad, to zoom in or out. You can hit Command or Control 0 to fit on screen. Hold down the space bar to move your canvas around and do all that stuff. So these three things you need to know because they'll come in handy. All right, so let's zoom in on her hair. I'm going to use the zoom tool for now. Let's say the way the hair was selected was just not up to our standard. We obviously don't want this chunky mess over here. So let's try using the refine brush tool. So we have the plus and minus. Whenever you see plus, just know that it's going to add to a selection. Minus, it's going to remove. And in this case, because it's a mask, it's going to restore the original image, meaning that if I were to minus my selection, it will remove from that red part. So whatever is red right now is not in our selection. As you recall, we chose the subject and the balloon only. So plus will add more of this red area, which is excluded from the selection, and the minus will bring some back. So with the plus, we want more red basically. Let's go over the edges of her hair. Let go. And you can see immediately we have less of that sky blue. I'm going to go in on the other areas and just fine tune my selection. So that's what it looks like. Just to show you a before, this is what we have now. This is what we had initially. Now another thing you can do is have Photoshop do that for you. You can see right up here we actually have a refine hair option. If I click it once, Photoshop will detect the hair and it will fix it for us. So I didn't really have to do the brushing myself. Now keep in mind it does say hair, but that does also apply to fur, maybe some fluffy shirt, anything like that. So mainly it's used for hair, but you can also use it for other stuff. So let's say I'm happy with this. Let's go over this area a bit. Using my spacebar, I'm going to move down and make sure we don't have something like this. Now for something where we have a more manageable shape, so we're not dealing with hair, we can actually go ahead and use the brush tool. So it's right beneath that one. Again, plus, minus, and then the size. It's just like the brush tool that we learned about. You can hit the forward bracket key to increase the size and the left bracket key or backward bracket key to make it smaller. That's another helpful shortcut. So if you hold down Alt or Option, you can just switch. So notice up here, plus or minus, hold down Alt and just remove these parts of the sky that ended up in our selection. We use the bracket keys, zoom in a little bit more, and you can see how delicate this becomes. So we're working literally pixel by pixel over here. Anything you see that is blue, we're going to get rid of it. Now from afar, when you zoom out, you may not be able to tell that this was a bad selection, that we got bits of the sky, but when you add other designs, it will become really evident. Okay, let's go down here. I think everything looks fine. Just gonna assume this is the shoelace and remove it like that. Alright, so I have my selection. Before I hit OK, let's take a look at some of this stuff on the right. These are the properties for your masking operations. So first of all, there's this thing called Show Edge. So when you press that, it's going to show only the parts that you've edited so far. So as you recall, in the beginning, we worked with the hair. So this is now showing the edges that it refined, which in our case was simply hair. We have Show Original, so you can see it before and after, just like this. Hold down P to do that. We have the View, which shows you how you want the masking to be seen. So usually it's just this red color, but you can do onion skin, which is basically where it takes that excluded area and lowers the transparency. We have the marching ants, which we're already familiar with, on black, on white, black on white, and then on layers. So currently we don't have any other layer, that's why it's transparent. Usually this is what you should go for because you can tell the difference between what's being selected and what's not a lot more easier. Then we have high quality preview. This will really help when you're working with larger and more precise selections. It will take a toll on your RAM, so make sure your computer can handle it. But instead of showing you the mini pixels that we had before, it's going to try to show you a higher quality preview when you're that zoomed in. Next, we have opacity. That's just how visible this red is, this overlay. You can also change it to a different color if you want, but red is a classic, so I'm going to leave it as that. And then you can decide what this red indicates. So selected area or the masked area. The presets here, you can either load a preset, save your settings as a preset itself, and just have them here whenever you need it. You can also hit remember settings, so the next time you open this panel, every setting here is already set to what you had it before. Next, we have the refine mode. So when you exclude those parts of the sky to isolate the hair better, are you using color aware or object aware? Now, what's the difference? When it says aware, it's basically talking about what it's using to replace those areas. So color just looks at the color around that selected area. Object looks at the object. So you can see when you go over it, best choice for hair or fur on complex background. So say if there's a couch behind my subject, I do want Photoshop to be mindful of that and not create some smudged look behind her hair. But since we had a blue sky, it was pretty much the same blue throughout, I chose color aware because it's just one color. We have edge detection. So right now it's at 0 pixels because the refinement area was very tiny. So hair in general, you don't want to have a lot of radius for it. But say you were refining a tree, you do want to increase that radius because there's bigger parts that you're trying to set apart. Then if you're not sure what to add on here, just enable Smart Radius and it will determine the radius of your brush. Now here are some global refinements. You can smooth out the edges, feather the edges, create more contrast between them, and then shift the edge. So if I just go over each one, you can see going to the left is going to go inwards, our selection. Going to the right does the opposite. Contrast, it lightens or darkens that edge. Feather softens the edge. And then smooth, smooths your selection. So if you use the hard edge brush and you have like these jagged lines, you can just smooth it over with this. All right, let's double click on each one to set them to 0 or their default values. And then move down to our last setting. We do have clear selection and invert. So if you wanted to grab everything else, leave that out, or clear the selection entirely, you can do that as well. All right, so decontaminate colors. So sometimes in images, when they're taken and uploaded on the internet, you will end up with some glitches where they show themselves as like purple bits around the corners of your subject, maybe some cyan. And when you select the decontaminate colors option, it's going to look for those glitches and get rid of them. And then you can decide how intense you want this to be. So at 0, it's going to look like that. At 100, it's going to look a lot better because it's getting rid of those glitches. This is especially important for low quality images. So if you notice some weird colors around your subjects, the edge of your subject selection, just come down here, enable this, then play around with the amount. Then lastly, we have the option to choose where we want this new thing outputted to. So we can either make a new layer with a layer mask, just a new layer on its own, a whole new document, a new document with layer mask. Now the ones with the layer mask still allow you to fine tune your selection in the future and then go back to change your selection. Whereas the new layer or the new document has this current selection set in stone. You can't really do much with it. Basically have to start over. So let's go ahead and choose new layer with layer mask and hit OK. So there's my new layer with the layer mask. That's what it looks like. I'm going to go to a different tool. Let's hit Command or Control 0 and move this here. I have my background hidden, but if I bring it back, that's just our original image. Now when I bring our top layer, which is the mask, I make it visible. You can't really tell the difference. That is because it's positioned right on top of its background. But if I were to move this with my move tool, you can see I just have another subject. So notice here that the subject is all in white and the background is in black. When it comes to masking, always remember that whatever is white is visible, whatever is black is not. And you can also fine tune this by, if you were here, just make sure you're on the mask itself. Use the brush tool that we already learned about. Have the color set to black and white. I'm going to switch to black. Let's hide this for a second. On this layer, I could use the color black to exclude parts of my subject and then use white to bring it back. But the problem is that it will bring back the entire image. So do be careful about that. You can also switch between these two by hitting X on your keyboard and just making this a lot simpler for yourself. So what's the point of making a layer mask? For the purpose of this lesson, we're just going to try something really simple. Let's make a new layer right above our background, layer 1, and then use our brush tool to make an interesting shape. So let's grab one of these artistic ones, increase the size, get a nice color, and just start drawing. So notice how our subject is not being affected by this brush at all. But if I were to hide this, the original image is, because as we learned in layers in the previous lesson, hierarchy is really important. If I bring this below my background, it's gone because this is being placed on top and it covers everything. So let's go back, bring this on, and now I'm able to just put whatever I want behind my subject. And then since it's a separate layer, I get to move it around and make some pretty cool stuff. What I can also do is use some of the filters we learned about previously, make maybe a hue and saturation effect right above our background, but below our layer mask, double click and maybe change the hue of the sky. Let's make it purple, maybe lower the saturation a bit, and there is my new background. My subject still remains the same, but we got this going on. Another cool thing you can do is, as I've been saying this whole time, going back to adjust the selection. So right now there is no marching ants for me to immediately go in and adjust my selection. Let's say I'm trying to get rid of this balloon and I just want my subject. What you can do is hold down Command or Control on your keyboard. You can see my cursor changes. And then click once on the mask. And there are the marching ants. Now, when I'm here, you can see that there's no selected mask. If I want that option, I have to go to one of these tools. But since this is a perfect circle, what I can also do is use my brush tool. So with this selected, with the marching ants visible, hit Q on your keyboard and you can see that we get that red overlay again. Once we have this, we can hit B on our keyboard to bring our brush. Right click, let's get a better brush, hard round, And then using that black and white logic we talked about, get rid of that balloon. So let's hit X on our keyboard to get the black color as our foreground. Zoom in and just remove the balloon. Once we're done, we can hit Q on our keyboard again to exit this mode and then make another layer mask. Go to layer 0, duplicate layer 0 by holding down Alt or Option, clicking and dragging that layer. And then with the marching ants, we're simply going to hit the layer mask again. So now I only have my subject and not the balloon. And then I could use, let's bring this all the way above. Grab the same filter, hue and saturation, and then just change the color of the balloon. Now notice how it's still changing the color of my background. That's where we need to limit something to one layer only. So I'm going to make this neon green. Go back to layers, and instead of having this affect everything below it, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and then have my cursor in between the two layers. So Alt or Option, click once between them, and you'll see this arrow pointing down. That means that this hue and saturation 2 effect is only being applied to background copy, which is the layer with the first mask that we made, meaning that my subject is not gonna have anything done to it. This one is affecting the sky, but I could do something else here just to show you. So hue and saturation, let's make her pink. Go to layers, again, Alt or Option, click in between. And now this pink, can rename it even, it's only affecting my subject. And this one just a ball. As we also learned, we can play around with the opacity, change the blend mode, do whatever it is we have to do. Lastly, we do have some special effects. It's called FX. These are things that you can apply to one layer alone. I will go over these in further lessons since each of them are pretty heavy on their own. But essentially, these are just for the selected layer. So it's not like the adjustments where it would be applied to everything below it. It's just for that layer. So to show you an example, I'll just go to Bevel and Emboss. Say this is the effect we were going for. Hit OK. You can only see the effects on that layer. You can hide it and do other stuff to it. But that about covers how we can use our brush tool, the layer masking, and just layers in general. So we have this image right here. Go ahead and download it from the resource folder and then import it into Photoshop. In this lesson, we're going to go over how to heal with the healing tools. Essentially, you're going to be replacing the imperfect parts of the image and having Photoshop heal it using the pixels around it. So let's go ahead and unlock this layer. Hit Command or Control J on your keyboard to duplicate it, and I'll call this layer Healing. This will help us see a before and after. Now on the layer, we're going to zoom in on these areas that we want to get rid of and scroll over to the healing brush tool. Notice there's a tiny triangle in the corner. If you long click, there are many other things that you can do here. So let's start at the top. We have spot healing brush tool. All of them work relatively in the same way. The main difference is how the brush is sampling. So spot healing goes spot by spot. The remove tool is a new tool. Healing brush tool will go in a more precise way. Patch tool works with bigger patches. Content aware move tool allows you to move things from an image into a different location. And then the red eye tool fixes red eyes in images. So all of these guys you'd use for healing parts in your photography, not so much for illustration or animation. Let's start with the first one, spot healing tool. It works just like your regular brush tool, except we have some stuff up here. First of all, we have those presets that we talked about, the size, hardness, and spacing of your brush. You do have the option to mix this with your tablet. So you have pen pressure, stylus wheel, but if you're using this on your computer, this shouldn't matter that much. You can change the angle of your brush, the roundness of it, the spacing of it, the hardness and size. Then we have mode. This is the blending modes that we also have over here, but this only concerns the brush strokes that you're about to make. So the types, we got three. We have content, texture, and proximity match. Now content is going to be considering the elements next to your image. So if you have a brick wall, it's going to make sure that pattern is consistent through your new selections. Create texture is only going to focus on the texture, not so much the color. And then proximity match is going to be very precise in terms of the pixels around your selection. So depending on what you're trying to heal, you would change between these three. For now, I'm going to focus on content aware and proximity match. In the further lessons, you may explore the other ones. And I believe we will go over editing a high-end portrait from scratch. So let's have it on content aware. Lastly, we have sample all layers. This, if you have it turned on, it means that it's going to consider everything. If you have it turned off, just that current layer. Since I'm dealing with the same image, I'm just going to have it on, but if you had a separate one, make sure to turn this off. All right, so when we right click, let's treat this as a regular brush. For healing, you do want to reduce your hardness, not all the way, but if you have it at 100% and try to remove this. If I try to zoom in, you can see the edges. Not sure if that's visible, but it's generally not a good idea. So you can see this area. I'm gonna go over it with my brush. It looks like a pimple patch in a way. So that's why you don't want to have the hardness at 100%. To make it more realistic, you should keep your hardness around maybe 40% or so, and then adjust the size depending on that area you're trying to get rid of. So let's try one with content aware. I'm going to click once and then let go. So that's pretty good. It looks very natural. Let's try it with proximity match on this area. And that is also good. The main difference is texture, so I'm not sure if you can tell, but this one looks a little bit smoother than this one. So that's why it's important to be aware of what kind of texture you're working with. Now, for the areas where you're dealing with a little point, the spot healing tool can be great because it's just one click and Photoshop doesn't have to do a lot with that. But when you're dealing with a larger area, you do want to use a different tool. So let's long click. We do have the remove tool. Let's click away. Again, we have plus and minus. This is for your stylus, the size of your brush, remove after each stroke. Let's sample all the layers. So let's give this one a try. It's just like the lasso tool. So let's go ahead and click that, let go. It's going to use generative fill to remove this area for you. This is a relatively new tool. You can see just like that, it removed it all for me. This works a lot of the times, but I'm still going to show you the rest so you have some options. And if in your case this didn't work, you would know how to use the other ones. So let me just zoom in and show you before and after. That looks pretty good. I'm going to hit Command or Control Z just so I can show you the other tools. Let's long click. Next we have the healing brush tool. Now this one, the difference between this and the spot healing tool is the way it samples. So the spot healing tool, you would just click once and it deals with that spot. But with the healing tool, we're going to sample the areas around it and tell Photoshop exactly what area to look for when trying to replace this imperfection. So again, we have the same things, blend modes. We can have our clone source. I'll go into that with the clone tool. Then we can look at the source. So either the sampled, which I'll show you how to do, or the pattern of that area. So since we're dealing with skin, there's not a specific pattern to follow. We're going to go with sampled. And then the rest is what it samples. If it's a line, legacy, the angle, and all that other stuff. You don't need to worry about this right now. But simply hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard. And if you're getting rid of, say, this area, you want to sample something close to it. So we have to realize that this area is a little bit more rosy than this area. So if I hold down Alt or Option, you can see my brush changes. Let's click once, and now I've loaded that into my brush. And immediately when I go over it, you can see how it's not the same. And just going over, you can see how it's not giving us a good result. So this is way too light. Let's undo that. and instead sample something close to this area. So when I go over it, you can kind of compare and see if this is a good selection. I'm changing the size of my brush with the right and left bracket key, and now I can just sample this area. Sample and then replace it. So this looks a lot better compared to that area, and that's just how the healing brush works. It's just important to know how to sample, so Alt or Option, any area, and just go over it. You can do this as many times as you want, and then just Command or Control Z to undo. And it's just going to give you that pattern. Let's undo that. The next one is the patch tool. This deals with larger areas, but you would need a larger area for it to sample. So it works like a lasso tool. I'm gonna grab this area. We have the same things as the lasso tool up here. We have source, destination. We can load in a pattern if we want, but for skin, we don't really want to deal with that. You can see when I go over the selection, we're getting this arrow, which means that I am currently choosing the source that I'm telling it to use to fix and heal this area. But we don't really have that much of a space. So we try to use the neck area to heal this. And as you can see, it's not looking that great. If I go somewhere like this, adjust the lightness, and doesn't really help with all those acne. So the patch tool, you would use it for, say, if you had a forest and you're trying to get rid of one particular tree and you have a lot more other trees to choose from. Using the patch tool then would work better since there's a lot of area for you to sample. But in our case, this is not a good tool to use. Let's hit Command or Control D to deselect and move to our next tool. Next one is Content Aware tool, which is actually a pretty cool, I believe it was called Content Aware Move tool, my bad. So this moves a part of your selection to a different location and then uses the content aware technology to replace that original selection. So let's say I want to put the eye over here for whatever reason. We're going to grab it like this and just move it somewhere else. And now I have her eye over here. You can see how it used that content aware technology to somewhat heal the eyeball. And now I could use the healing brush tool to kind of clean this up. And it also attempted to blend this in. It didn't do a good job since we have a difference in lightness here, but at least this area looks pretty nice. Let's hit Command or Control Z. Command or Control D. Now up here we have the same settings as our lasso tool, but right next to it we have the mode. So do we want to move something, which is what we just did, or do we want to extend it? So if I want to extend her eye, this is what it's gonna look like. So now I have another eye. I could do something. If I have like a mole here, I could duplicate it or extend her mole to here as well. It's a pretty cool tool. We'll use this in the further lessons. Lastly is the red eye tool. It's for red eyes. We don't really have one right now, but the way it would work is that you can select eyeball, the red dots, and you can see how it's trying to desaturate that. So you can change the pupil size. So if you want to make it really big, ended up taking from here. We can also decide how much you want to darken. So that was 50%. This is a lot less. And notice how it's only taking anything red toned out. So our eyes are brown at the moment. It's kind of removing that red color from that selection, and we're ending up with a dark blue blackish color. So if you have red eyes in your photos, Photoshop can help you get rid of that with a few simple clicks. Alright, so the other stuff that we can work with is the clone tool. The clone tool is actually something that could help when you're dealing with patterns. So not for this particular reason because it doesn't blend anything in. It simply copies wherever you're sampling, which I'm using Alt or Option on my keyboard to do. If I were to sample here and go over this, you can see how it's the exact same pattern just over here. And I'm using my brush to paint it in more freely. Unlike the healing brush tool, it doesn't do any sort of adjustment itself, and therefore this doesn't look blended in at all. Over here we have the modes again. The opacity, the flow, which is how much, in a sense, ink is coming out of our brush, which With any sort of face adjustments, you do want to keep it less than 100% to get the most natural result. We'll go over these in a more advanced lesson, so don't worry about it right now. And then we have sample, current below, all layers, or just current layer. Again, we're dealing with the same image underneath, so I'm just going to leave it as what it is right now. We have some other tools down here in regards to just healing. It's not exactly for healing, but it is something you would use in this scenario. So it looks like a finger, and as the name says, it's a smudge tool. So I could use, let's use a better brush, my round brush with softness. I'm going to start from here. The blur tool allows you to blur things in. So I'm going to go over this, and you can see how I blurred out her eyes. The more I go over this, the more blurry it's going to be. Now the blur tool, you can use it for something very minimal. For a more consistent and more flexible blurring option, you should be using something from the filter box. That's something I'm going to go over in a further lesson, but that's just how the blurring tool works. Set Command Control Z, get my original work back. Next is the sharpen tool, does the exact opposite. You can maybe make her lashes sharper and get more definition. Again, the more you go on one stroke, the more intense it's going to be. You can also adjust the strength up here, and then of course we have the blend modes. Hit Command or Control Z. Lastly is the smudge tool. This will just smudge your work, and that's pretty much all it does. There's the strength, which if you adjust, it's going to be less intense. The blend mode and the angle, again, you can sample all the layers or not. There's the adjustment brush tool. This is a new tool that I'll go over in its own dedicated lesson, but right underneath is more adjustment tools. So we have the dodge tool, which is brightening up a certain area. So let's say I found this area of her nose to be a little too dark. I could use the dodge tool, choose the range, and the exposure, which is how light this is going to be. So let's go ahead and start dodging this layer. The more you go over a layer again, it's going to add more of that effect. I'm going to stop here. Let's take a look at a before and after. You can see how much lighter it became, but it looks pretty natural. Now, if this was not enough intensity for you, you can increase this, but I would not recommend it because it will just look really unnatural. So always try to have this at a lower number, maybe 10, less than 15% should be fine, and just build up on your selection. I'm just gonna go over the area with my brush, and there we have it. The next tool is the burn tool, which does the exact opposite. So if an area is way too bright for you, let's say this area, you can use the burn tool to just make it darker. And again, this is very subtle. It's a before and after. Let me try to zoom in here with less distractions. So before, after. So it's a little darker now. Again, you can work with the opacity, the exposure, so how much do you want it to take out? This is 16%, and it's looking a lot darker. I'm going to hit Command or Control Z. The last one is a sponge tool, which essentially what it does is that it blends in these two things. So let's say let me try making a really intense edit. Let's add 70% of dodge here, and then 50% of burn here. So notice this clear divide between the dodge and the burn. To fix that, we can use the sponge tool, which has different modes. So we can either desaturate it or saturate it. And I'm going to increase the flow a lot just so we can see the change it does. And we can see this is how it attempted to blend these two in. We go at a lower flow. You can see how that's a lot better. You can also try saturating it, which is when it brings back color instead of taking it out, and use that method to blend the two in. So you can see how the dodge area, which was really white, looks a lot better and more skin colored. Let's hit Command or Control Z, zoom out, and that pretty much is our healing and adjustment tools. Now, my favorite method of getting rid of an area like this is actually using the lasso tool. I could first of all group the areas that I'm trying to get rid of based on their darkness, right click, and just hit Content Aware Fill. And this is our preview. I'm going to hit OK. I'll come back to this panel in a different lesson. But you can see how that on its own is a lot better than some of the other tools we looked at. Now, if you choose a really big area and do that, you may end up with some patching problems. So I'm not sure if you can see, but there's these patches all over. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it just means that you have to go back in and like clean this up. So you can use any of these tools to do that. Let's try maybe the healing tool. Try to sample this area and just go over that patch. Still not that perfect, but that pretty much is how the tools work. In our photography category, we're gonna go over how to use these tools to professionally remove imperfections and make the edits. But by the end of this lesson, which we're pretty much there, you should know what each of these tools do and how you can use them. Now, with the more practice you get, the better you're going to be at choosing the right tool and getting better results. So now let's move on to our next lesson where I'll tell you about the text tool, which is completely different from what we've been doing so far, but it's a really helpful and essential tool within Photoshop, especially if you plan to do a lot of graphic design or illustrations. Now with the text tool, you can easily access it right over here. That's a letter T. It's very straightforward in terms of how you add a text with the fonts and the sizes. So a lot of you should be familiar with what these are, but I'm still going to go over each one and then we'll move into how we can distort text and do other things with it in the rest of the course. So the text tool is right here. When you long click it, there are 4 options. So the first one is the horizontal type tool, which means you're going to type horizontally. That's how you would type it anyway. But we also have the vertical type tool, which is going from top to bottom. Vertical type mask tool, which is going to create a layer mask on the edges of that letter. And then of course the horizontal type mask tool. So first let's go ahead and unlock our background layer. I just made a very simple document. And start with the most basic one, which is the first one, horizontal type tool. So on the top right here, you get to choose your font. There's a lot of options and there are some filters. Just to tell you what they are, these are the different styles of text. So they've been grouped into these tabs based on how they look. When you look at a few different types of fonts, you will notice some major differences. Some of them being very bulky and fun, some of them being kind of cursive. We have really thin ones, those that look like a typewriter and all that sort of stuff. To isolate those types of visuals, Photoshop has filters right here for you. So we have serif, these are your serif fonts, slab serif, sans serif, script, monospace, handwritten, there's no black letter, and then decorative. So depending on what type of font you want, you can go over to these categories or just explore all of them via the all classes. Now, where do you get your fonts from? If you go to more fonts, you can import the ones from Photoshop, of course, but you can also download a font and install them on your local computer. If you have an Adobe subscription, there is Adobe Fonts. So if you activate it on that website, it will be added to your Adobe account that you've used to log into Photoshop. You can also download fonts from third-party websites. Just make sure that you're installing them properly depending on the system you're using. Once you've installed it, restart Photoshop and it should show up in the list that we're looking at right now. So let's go to your fonts. We can search for a font here. So let's say I want Times New Roman. I get a bunch of different options. So I can choose the regular one and then decide on the style that's native to this font. So my Times font right now has a regular italic bold, bold italic, but that is not the case for all the other fonts. So let me go with 8 heavy. So this font is called 8. And when we go over here, the style is only 1. So this depends on your font's capabilities. You can also see that on their left there is this drop down menu, so you can see what type of styles each font has. For example, April Fatface doesn't have any styles and it's just a regular, but Acumen Pro has all of these styles, and we can see the sample right here. You can also add in emojis on Photoshop with these ones. If you're not seeing these, you can try downloading some emoji fonts from the internet, as we talked about. So you can filter through the fonts you got from Adobe Fonts, your favorite fonts, and then something similar to the one you had selected. So I had the letter 8 font, and now you can see it's suggesting these two to me so that I may have more options to choose from. Let's clear all and then just choose a font for now. Let's grab this one. Click on your screen and you can immediately start typing. Click the move tool and you have the option to make it bigger, smaller, flip it, rotate it if you want, and just treat this like a regular layer. Because as you can see on the right, we now have a separate layer that we may do all the things we learned about. So dragging it, putting it in a group, changing the opacity, the fill, the blend mode, and anything else. Now let's go back to the text tool, double click. Right here we have the font size. You can use the drop down menu, type something in, or use the slider here. Then we have the alignment. So we want it centered, to the left, to the right, the color of our text, and then we have some of those special things that Photoshop allows you to do with the text. So warping in general is when you get to distort something into a certain angle, certain direction, and right away everything is grayed out because we don't have a style selected. But let me bring this here with the spacebar. Once you choose your style, so we have arc, bulge, and a bunch of other stuff. These are decorative things that you can use for posters or whatnot. Each of them will give you a set of options down here. So the first one is horizontal or vertical. Right now it's creating this bulge at the bottom, but we can also make it do it vertically. Decide how much of a bend you want, how much distortion horizontally, how much distortion vertically. So you have the same options for all of them, and some of them will gray out some stuff like twist because it's horizontal and vertical. We don't really need to choose anything here. You can go to arc and just make some changes to our text. You can type in your values, and I'm going to make this horizontal. Let's make like something like that. Once you're done, hit OK, and now we have a decorative font. I can move this around still. Not much has changed. The fact that this is still a text tool lets me to double click, go back and maybe adjust a few things. But if I turn this into a rasterized layer, which you can do by right-clicking, going to rasterize type, it will become a regular layer, meaning that I can no longer use my text tool to double click and change the way it looked. I can now treat this as a regular layer. Let me lock my background and play around with this one. Alright, Command or Control Z. So that's the horizontal text tool. You can also go over to the Properties panel and do a few other stuff. So the same things are available here, but you will notice we have some other things starting from the space between lines. So what I'm going to do right now is set this to 0 and write another word. So hit enter, type in something else. Alright, so the first one is the space between hello and world. So right now it's set to auto, but I can decide how close or how far I want the second word to be to my first word. This one is the space between each letter. This one's the color. If you go in this 3 dots, you will also find the height of each of the letters, the width of each of the letters. So we're basically distorting our thing. And then the baseline shift. So the baseline is where your text is sitting on. But if I have this at 0, you can see that the baseline is right over here. If I shift it up or down, it's going to move where the text is sitting on in a different direction. Then we got some languages, which won't change the language of your keyboard, but just some of the settings made specifically for that language. So for example, if you're using a Middle Eastern language like Arabic or Persian, Photoshop does have to connect the letters, whereas with English, there could be those spaces between them. But of course, you're going to need the Persian or Arabic keyboard to be able to use one of these. So if I set this to Arabic right now, you can see it didn't really change this word into an Arabic word. It's just applying the settings that I would need if I were to type in Arabic right now. Next, we have the paragraph settings. This is for when you have a paragraph. So how do you do a paragraph within Photoshop? Let's delete this. Hit T on our keyboard to get our text tool. Click and drag to make your paragraph. By default, it will give you this dummy text, which is perfect because now we get to see how we can paragraph settings. Just going to choose a lighter font, change the color. So when we scroll down, the first thing is alignment, and then we have justification. If you hit the 3 dots, we're going to get new stuff. So indentation, and then from the left side, same thing from the bottom. So say this is what we had. I'm going to set all of them to 0. Hitting tab on my keyboard to move to the next thing. Let's hit enter. All right. Now hyphenate is talking about this one. So when a word cannot fit on this line, there's going to be a hyphen, and then the rest of those letters are going to be moved down to the next line. But if you don't want that happening, just turn off the hyphenate option. I hit Command or Control A to select everything. When I undo this, you can see that word was moved to the next line. But if you're okay with this effect, you can leave it on. We have some bullets and numbering, so you can make bullet points just like you would in a Word document. Turn it into numbers, letters, Roman numerals, and anything else. Let's undo that. You can also change the style of your bullet, which we have up there. There's only 4 things to choose from. Select it again to undo or just not apply that effect to it. Then we have some type options. First one is capitalizing everything. So when I click it once, it turns everything into capital letters. This one turns it into lowercase. The next one turns it into small caps. So right now this is way too giant. I could click on this to make it more refined and better. We have superscript, which will allow you to write a text atop of a word. So let's do that. You can see how it turned that into a little text on top of I. So if you have any math equations or physics formulas, you can use this option. We have subscript, which is the exact opposite. So it goes at the end. We have underline. We have overline, which draws a line on top of your words, your letters. Looks like that. And the rest of them are currently grayed out because they are not suitable with this particular font. But if you were to choose something more basic like Arial, you can see we got this guy and this guy brought out for us. So let me just undo all of these, get my lowercase back. So the other stuff down here is really depending on the font itself. It's talking about how words are blending into each other. Do they connect? So if you have, let's say, a cursive font, you can decide how, say, the letter L and E get to connect. So these are just some stylistic choices that you can explore with. Then we have a special tab for East Asian features and Middle Eastern features. So East Asian, if you're doing something like Chinese, Korean, there are some specific rules that are only needed for those type of fonts. So you can choose how thick the characters is, which is called sume. We can change the text orientation and line breaking rules, text composition, and all that stuff. For Middle Eastern features, you can choose that it's being written from the left to right or right to left. So in this case, it would be right to left. So if this were an Arabic text, it would have to start like this. You can also decide that connection I talked about earlier, so how thick or thin that connection is. That's if you're using these type of languages. And then at the bottom, we have some quick actions, converting this to a frame. If you click that once, you can turn it into a frame or a shape. The reason why you would do this is if you want to put a pattern or a specific design into the areas where the text is, but normally you wouldn't do it. So let's undo that action with Command or Control Z and move on to the other stuff. So in terms of which of these belong to text, we have, of course, the properties panel, but there's also paragraph styles. So let's say you are editing different types of newspapers or doing magazines. There's a specific style that you have to keep using for each of the pages. So instead of choosing your font again, your size, your style, you can make a paragraph style yourself. So say I want to have one style like this. I will hit the plus sign and now I have paragraph style 1. So changing the fonts, you can see how I can switch back and then I can rename this into, say, magazine body text. Come over here and put in my options, like I want it to be this font, 12 points. Maybe we can make it smaller. I want them to be red. Formatting, open text, composition, and all that stuff. So if you do a lot of text work, these should be able for you. Hit OK once you're done. And with one click, I could just change this to that new text style. Then we can, of course, go back and switch around between these styles. You can delete a text style if you wanted to and rename it as we saw. This will remove the override, so it will take you back to where you began. Alright, that was paragraph styles. We also have character styles. So this is for individual characters or letters. If you want a specific type, so let's make one right now, double click. Say I want it to be an emoji, or actually let's choose something else, something big like that. So I can go to none and then just choose a few of these characters to have this specific style set to it. So it's the exact same thing, but just for characters. Next, we have the paragraph panel, which we went over. The character panel, we also went over that. And I believe we do have one more called glyphs. Now, glyphs is when you download a font or import it, the designer who did that initially has different options for you to explore. So different ways that the K is being written in. So right now, by default, let me choose the same font. Just 8. Alright, so right now, let me try to find the M, for example. So right now, when I go over here, you'll notice these tiny squares at the corners of the letters that are being used here. But there are different ways for me to write my letter M. So we have this option. If I don't like this, I can click once on that, double click, sorry. And now I have this special M putter. Same thing with all the different alphabets. We also have some symbols for you to choose from. And if you're doing any sort of logo type or poster design, I highly recommend coming over here because you never know what kind of options your fonts came with. So we have some cool Ks. We got some decorative stuff as well. I could replace this D with this shape. That's totally fine. We can scale up the glyphs, make them bigger, make them smaller, and the way we're seeing these previews. We can also go over what parts of this glyph we want to see. So everything for this font, only math symbols. There's only a plus and minus, only symbols, and all that other stuff. Now, not every font has this. I believe I mentioned that. Say if I were to go on this emoji one, this will have its own set of glyphs. So it's never one thing. If I go over this one, you can see how it's a lot more different. But it's still a pretty cool panel to come to when you're trying to make your text a little bit interesting. And that's about it. So that's how we do the horizontal text. Vertical text is the exact same thing, but just vertical. But I'll show you that anyway. You can see our cursor turned the other way. And now I can write the same thing, but on the other end. So if you have a specific language that's looking for this version, this style, then this is how you do it. We also have those masking that I told you earlier, which is when you get to create a mask out of those letters. So notice that red overlay, that should be pretty familiar to you. Let's decide on our font and size, hit enter. Now you can see I got the marching ants, meaning that if I go in my layer panel, right now there's nothing there, but I can add in a a pattern, let's say from here, click it once, and now I got myself this effect. Go to my layers panel and we can find that layer mask. You can double click here and choose a different pattern. Let's go for trees. And this is applicable to the vertical version as well. And then you can treat this as a regular layer. Let's delete that. And alright, that concludes our text tool. Pretty simple to use, but there are some hidden cool features that allow you to take your text to the next level, especially for poster and graphic design. Now let's take a look at the pen tool. It's situated right below our dodge and burn tool, and it looks like a pen. So when you long click on it, there are tons of other options, but we're going to start right at the basic, the general pen tool, which allows you to do basically all the other stuff below it. So grab that, get yourself a canvas. I just unlocked my background layer, and let's take a look at the stuff up here. So first are the presets that we get for all the other tools, but right next to it we have the option of either shape or path. Now let's start with shape. That's the easiest method to use the pen tool for. Right next to shape is the fill color that you can grab and the stroke color. Then it's the thickness of your stroke, which you can use the slider, and then what your stroke looks like. So is it a dashed line, dotted line, and then the alignment, caps, and corners. To show you these better, I'm going to just start drawing a shape. So grab your pen tool and make some dots. So first dot, you need a second dot so it connects. Let's do a regular triangle. And as soon as you have an area between your strokes, that is when the fill color will show up. To close your shape, we just go back to our first dot. Now let's zoom in right here, use our space bar, and let me show you what those three options were for. So align is talking about the alignment of your stroke based on that path that you just drew. So the blue line here, which is what we're making with our pen tool, is the path. It only turns to a shape because we're having a closed area for there to be a fill color for. So do we want this width, this stroke, to be aligned at the center of the path, on the right side or on the inside of our shape, or on the outside? Next is the caps, which is the cap of the path. Right now is sharp. You can turn it into round or a square shape. I will have to show you this with a different one, but right now we're dealing with a corner. So corner, we have a sharp turn right now. We can turn it into a round one or something cut like this. Let's take a look at our caps. So I'm just going to do 1, 2. That's all we're doing. Let's zoom in. And now we get to use this option to decide where the cap ends. So right now it ends right at our point. Second one is a rounded one. And lastly, it's a square one, but it extends from that point that we made. We do have more options, but these are in regards to our stroke only. So these are the same things as the one we chose here, but if you chose a dashed line, which I'm just going to turn on right now, it turns your stroke into dashes. And now we get to decide how many dashes we want in this path. Right now it's 4. Use your arrow keys to, let's do like 6 maybe. So I'm getting larger things, but the gap here is what making it different. So you can make this into 3 and just add different spacings and different length for each of them. So this is how you get to change it up. You could turn this into your own presets or just use one of the presets that were made for you. Once we're done, we can hit OK. And then let's take a look at some of the other options. I'm just going to lock our background layer so I don't move anything other than my shapes. Next, it's talking about the width and the height. That's talking about the path only. In terms of the shape, you could use it, but it's going to give you a distorted result. If you're not comfortable using these, you can also hit Command or Control T to resize that shape, just like you would with any other layer. Lastly, we have the option to combine a shape, subtract a shape, intersect, and exclude. This is the same logic that we looked at in the selection lesson. So instead of adding to our selection, we can combine two shapes. So let's make another one. And you can see how it's on the same layer, but now I have this combined shape. We have alignment, so align to canvas or selection. You can distribute it. And then we have the hierarchy of that shape. So is it below one, above one, and you get to situate it like that. All right, so going back to our shape, let me hit Command or Control Z. You can see the blue line going around our shape. So let me actually change this into something else so we can see that color better. Now, what if you wanted to remove a point? Say you made your shape, but you made an extra side by accident. Let's draw a random shape. Let's do this, for example. But I realized that I wanted a square, and this thing is just not up to my standard. When I hover over any point, notice how there's a minus next to my pen tool. That minus indicates that when I select it, it's going to delete that shape. If you go on that same selected path, there's going to be a plus. That indicates that you can add a point. Just like that. Now, why would you add a point? When you add a point, you can see that there's two circles right next to that point. So let me do that again. The square is our point. We get two circles. Now we get to move this point simply by holding down Command or Control on our keyboard, clicking once on that point and then just dragging it. So I can adjust my shape as I go forward. Now, why is it rounded when I didn't even create a round? I just did 1, 2, 3, 4. That is where those rounded handles come in handy. Essentially, the more these handles are stretched out, the curvier your path is going to be. So holding down Command or Control again, click on the handle and just experiment with it. You can see how that's changing the curve. And as I mentioned, the longer the curve, the more of a rounded effect you're going to have. Whereas this one is pretty short, it's barely rounded. And if we didn't want this curve, we wanted a sharp turn, all we have to do is hold down Alt or Option and then click on that main point. And now those handles are gone, meaning that we're just getting a sharp edge like this. Similarly, we can do that Alt or Option thing on one of the handles. What if I want one side to be curved, but the other side to have no curve? That's where I get to hold down Alt or Option. You can see my cursor changes. Click and drag on that edge only. So when I push this all the way into my path, there is no curve. And that's precisely what you see. So even though they are supposed to be moving together, you can only move one of the handles via Alt or Option. All right, so this was our shape. But what if you want to turn this into a selection? You can do that by right-clicking and then making the selection. That familiar marching ant shows up, and what I get to do is adding a shape or a color restricted to the inside. So let's go ahead and click the adjustments right here. Go to Pattern and just add this forest pattern. You can see that shape is exactly the layer mask. And that is how you can use the pen tool for more than just drawing. Now going back up here, remember that there is a shape tool within Photoshop and there is the path option. So when you're making shapes, it's generally an extension of the shape tool right here. If you long click, you can see all sorts of shapes. We have the classics, and then we have a custom shape tool where if you press on it, you're going to get a large library of all sorts of shapes. So let's say a tree. We can just put that in right there, and it will follow the same fill and stroke that you have selected here. So if I lower the width of my stroke, we can actually see that green. But sometimes the shape tool doesn't have the shape you want, so you'd end up using the pen tool to create that shape. But everything above here for the shape tool is the exact same as the pen tool, except of course we have that library. Now let's go over the path option for the pen tool, and that way I can show you exactly what you can do with it. Let's switch from shape to path, and immediately it gets rid of the colors, the width, and the stroke. Instead, we can make something like this. Let's say this is my path. I'm going to close it, and as you can see, nothing happens. That's because we need to choose what we want to do with this. So you can click selection. This will show up, and basically it's asking you if you want to feather the edges of the selection, which if you do, it will make the selection a lot more natural. So let's say 2 pixels. Click OK, and there's my selection. So if I had an image, I could make a new layer based off of this, or I could do what I did before, which was to add a pattern. So notice because of that feather radius, the edges are not as sharp. Now going back to that path, let me make something else. You can also use it to mask something. So let me just bring in another pattern. So let's just go over here and I'll get this tree. And let's delete the layer mask. Right click, so we just have the pattern fill. Now with the pen tool, I can start making my selection. If you hold down shift, you can make straight lines. And now I have a perfect square. When I hit mask, it will create a mask on top of that layer. So now I have my forest fitted into a square. And this is with 0 feathering, so you can see the edges of this selection is a lot more sharp than the previous one. Alright, let's go back here, do a few more things. If I changed my mind about making this into a path, I could just switch and change it into a shape. And now I have shape 1. So if you go on the shape tool, I can change the fill from a pattern into a solid color like we've been doing so far. We also have a gradient option, which is when you go from one color to the other. So black to white, red to white. You can change the angle, change the type of gradient, so radial from the center, angle, reflected, or diamond. Like all the other things, we have a large library for you to choose from. You can also switch the colors by hitting this button. So we have solid color, gradients, and patterns, which is what we've been using so far. You can also just click this and put in your own code for that unique color that you want. Alright, so that was the original pen tool, but there's some other stuff in the drop-down menu that we can also explore. So I'll just make a new layer. Let's long click on this and take a look. So that was the pen tool. Next we have the freeform pen tool, which basically allows you to make really free selections. So I'm not dealing with points here, but I could just go around and make something like this. I have the same options up here. I could right click, make this a selection, choose the radius for feathering, maybe fill it with a certain color. So if I choose color, it'll ask me what color, and now it's filled with red. Now with the freeform, you can't really make points. You can see I'm clicking everywhere, nothing's happening. But once I make my weird shape, close it up, I will see the points made for me. So this is less precise, but if you do want something curvy like this, you still have the option to either delete one of the points or use the handles that we saw before, hold down Command or Control, and maybe intensify or sharpen one of the curves. So it's the same thing, it's just the way that you're introduced to them is not the same. We can also, like the other pen tool, add to our selection. So let me just continue this. I'll go to the edge here and connect it to my first thing. Only once you've filled in your shape, you've closed the shape, you can go ahead and make a new shape. So right here we have combine shape, subtract, and the same things we've had so far. Let's try the intersection. I'll draw something else, close it, and now I have this effect. I could make a selection of it, and it's pretty much the same thing. So I'm just gonna hit delete. Now notice here that even though I deleted the previous selection, I can't really grab this one to delete it. So I'm selecting it, hitting backspace. As you can see, nothing happens. That's because I'm dealing with a path here, as I mentioned. And the way Photoshop works is that it saves your paths in a different window called Paths, which if you're not seeing it here, just go to Window and click on Paths. So when you go on there, you can see there's something called work path, and it looks exactly like what we have here. If I wanted to delete this, I would have to come here, hit delete, and there we go. If I make a new path, it will show up right there. I could make another new path like this and then proceed to fill it in, or just do it vice versa. You can hit that button to turn it into a selection with the marching ants, or turn it back into a path. Also, if you've used the lasso tool, you can turn it into a path just like that. So these work interchangeably. Let's delete both of them and take a look at the other pen tools. Next, we have Content Aware Tracing Tool. Now this is for when you have something already on your screen. So for this, I just imported an image into Photoshop. This is in the resource folder, so just import it in. And using the Content Aware pen tool, it's going to detect an object for you and automatically create a path around it. So we have a human subject and we have this balloon. When I have my mouse over an area like the sky, you can see nothing's going on with my cursor. But once I go towards the balloon, especially the edge of it, you can see something does show up. When I click on that area, it creates a path around my balloon. The same thing can work with the human subject, but since that is more isolated, it was easier to find. And notice how it did make a mistake around this area. We already learned how to deal with that. Let's grab Command or Control and just simply work with the points here. Click once until that's the only dark blue one, and you're able to move this to the side and then work with the handle. There we go. We can add to that selection. So I could try getting the mountain here or that tree. And you can see I still have that blue line around my balloon. I could remove from that selection. So let's hit around the balloon and I'm getting rid of the points. We have Make Selection. So it's saying no pixels are selected because I don't have a closed shape. But it essentially works like the other pen tool. So let me just grab this and then click here to complete my shape. And I think we should be good to go. Let's see if we're missing an edge. So now I can make a selection. I can go to paths and just call this balloon. So whenever I'm in need of a selection for my balloon, I just need to make a really precise selection once, save it over here, and then I can just come back to it and click on it. Let's go ahead and delete that. And now the blue lines are gone. We have some other stuff here. This is the same for every pen tool. Alignment, the hierarchy, the different settings we went over. And then tracing, we have normal, simplified, or detailed. This is depending on what kind of shape you're dealing with. By default, it's on normal, but if you're dealing with a really detailed work like a building, you might want to switch on to this. This will use more computer power, so make sure your computer can handle it. And then here you're determining how much detail you want Photoshop to put into this selection. By default, it's set to this. Again, you can determine how much you want it for your object. The next pen tool is the curvature pen tool. So this is just for curves. I'm going to go back to our original document. And unlike the first pen tool where we made points and we got sharp edges, this allows you to make points, but it's going to be rounded edges. So unless you're making it sharp, you're going to be getting curves all the time. So if you hold down Alt or Option and then click on one of these points, you can see how it's turning what is not fully curved into curve and then vice versa. So I could uncurve everything by holding down Alt or Option, bring it back by holding down Alt or Option again. We can, like the other ones, make a point and then just click and drag it. You can see I'm not getting any handles here because it's curved by default. I only need to make it sharper and undo that. Same settings up here, not much has changed. Gonna delete this and then we get to move to our other tools. So we have Add Anchor Point tool, which adds the anchor point to that path that you have. So I'm just gonna go back, just draw something real quick. When we add points, until now we've been using the Command or Control to do it, but you can also just use this tool to add points. And because they're anchor points, they come with those handles. So it doesn't matter if you're using the curve tool to make your curve or the regular pen tool, you can add the anchors just like this. And then of course you can move them around, play with the handles and do whatever else. And then we have the opposite, which is delete anchor point tool. So it deletes these points that we just made. Next, we have Convert Point tool, which is the shortcut alter option that we've been using. But if it's a curve, it gets shifted to a sharp edge. If it's sharp, it gets shifted to a curve. Now, before I end this lesson, I do want you guys to practice going around a subject. So let's go back to this image right now. And what I want you guys to do is use the selection tools that we've learned so far to grab the human subject and these two walls. So let's go over that together. You may choose to use one of the auto features. Let's hit cloud, select subject. There it is. And now using the pen tool, I can make an estimate of what I want these lines to look like. Let's actually go for the ones at the bottom to make it a little easier. Grab your pen tool, and before I hit anything, I'm going to go to paths and create a new one. Let's hit this first, and now we got one. So let's call this human. Let's make a new layer, and on path 1, I'm going to use my pen tool to make a line from there to the edge, close it off, and then from there to the edge, and then make sure to connect it. To make it precise, we're going to hold down Command or Control and match it up with the correct perspective. Be sure to click again so that the blue line only applies to the point you're trying to change, and then do the same thing down here. Once I have this, I can make a selection, and let's do some adjustments. So I'm going to go over here, and let's say I want to change the ground color into something else, maybe something like that, a little reddish. Close that off, go to our paths, grab the human layer, quick selection, go to layers, and we're simply going to remove the adjustment from this hue and saturation. So currently you can see it's coloring his pants too. Now that I have the marching ants around my human subject, all I need to do is make sure that white is the foreground color. So let's hit X to switch it. On this layer, let's hit the backspace and then Command or Control D. So now my human subject is no longer pink. To soften the edges a bit, I'm going to double click on the layer mask and simply feather the edge. So not a lot because it gets rid of everything, but we're just going to feather it by around a few pixels. If it's too intense, we can lower it by a little bit. And now the floor is pink. So before or after. A really simple thing to do. So we use the selection tools and the pen tool and use some masking to change the ground color. The action panel in Photoshop allows you to turn frequently used edits into one button. So if you frequently turn your images to black and white or change the hue of your greens, the action panel can make your workflow a lot faster, as you can record your workflow once and just use that button over and over again. So let's go ahead and take a look at that panel. If you go to Window, it's going to be the first one there called Actions. So if you have the latest version of Photoshop, you will see a lot of these predetermined actions. But let's just go over some of the basic ones. I'm going to close all of them. And we can see we have vignette, we have frame channel, wood frame, and all that stuff. These are things that if I were to hit play using this button, what if feather is not available? Now these are things that if I were to just choose one and hit play, so I'm going to grab this one, which is supposed to turn our image into sepia toning. If I hit the triangle next to it, I can see exactly what happens. So we make a snapshot. We merge the layers, we desaturate, and then we make the following adjustments. So those are the steps that this action will take. Let's select it, then hit the play button down here. You can see in one click, my image turned into something else following those very steps. And if I go here, it just made layer 1 and the hue and saturation. So when you first import, as you know, we only have our background layer. This came up because of the actions panel. All right, let's go back to our actions panel, gets lost there, and see what else we can do. So you can delete an action, make a new set, which is what you can use to store these actions. So right now they're in default. Let's go ahead and make a new set. Let's call it colors. Hit OK. Now within colors, there's nothing in there. So let's go ahead and make a new action. Before that, I'm just going to delete the adjustments that I made. Delete the layer mask and then delete that. So back to the beginning. Let's go to the actions panel, and what I'm going to do is create an action for turning an image into black and white. Very simple. Hit the plus mark right here. Let's call it make it black and white. Set, we want it to be in colors, but you can set it into whatever sets you have. Function key, so when you hit a keyboard shortcut, which would be from the following, this action will happen. I'm going to select none for now, and then a color for you to organize them better. Now we're going to record. Now whatever you do from the time this turns red until you stop it is going to be saved as your make it black and white action. So let's go ahead and duplicate this, Command or Control J. And let's do something really simple. So just black and white filter. Let's clip it down, play around with these slides a bit just so our action is interesting. Let's say that is my adjustment. Go to actions and then hit stop. So what do we have here? We have layer via copy, which is what we did. Make adjustment layer, create clip and mask current layer, set current adjustment layer. That's exactly what we did. If I were to delete what I just made, so all of that, start from fresh, go to the actions panel and simply play this action, it will turn it into black and white. So you can do this for more complex workflows, such as turning the hues of every color within your image into a specific color palette, maybe adding some vintage filters, creating things from scratch. This will make things a lot faster for you. Now let's learn how to make our own custom brushes from either a drawing or an image. I'm going to start with an image right here. This is available in your resource pack. We used this before in an older lesson. So import this into Photoshop and let's go ahead and select the subject using the methods we've learned so far. I'm going to make this quick. Grab one of my selection tools, have Photoshop selected for me, and then go to select and mask just to fine tune the hair. So hit refine hair, Photoshop detects it for us, everything looks good. As you recall, we did have some imperfections here that I'm going to remove via the brush tool. Once we're done with our selections, let's hit OK. And it's going to make us a new layer with this selection. Let's delete the background, right click on the mask to apply that layer mask. Now we have a transparent piece out of our subject. Next, we're going to grab the adjustments down here, exposure, and turn this image into just a black solid shape. And this will give us our brush. So make sure there are no details available or visible inside your object or subject. And if you have to, if it's still like kind of gray and you can see the outline, for whatever reason, you can just duplicate the exposure layer with Command or Control J just to intensify the effect. Once we're done, we're gonna go and just merge everything together. So grab the first one, hold down Shift, grab the last one, right click, and then merge the layers. So that's all we have right now. Let's go to Edit, then Define Brush Preset. Call this Flying Lady with Balloon. Hit OK, and now I have my brush. So I could click, I have my red color loaded in with 55% flow. Let's increase that. Click once and I got myself this subject. Now with something like this where you have one singular subject in your brush, if you click and drag this, it's going to look weird. So what you can do is increase the spacing of your brush. Go right over to this box containing the brush, and it's going to bring the brush settings for this particular brush. So down here we can see that when we stretch it, we're going to get this effect, which is what we just saw. But we want it to be in a way when we click and drag, we're just getting like multiple flying people. So this is just size, the orientation, but this is where we need to be looking at. So the spacing between each of the strokes. If you increase the spacing, you can see slowly we're getting different people. And now if I draw, I'm getting them just like that. The more I increase, the more space between each of the two. So use this as you'd like to make this work. This is especially helpful with singular objects. So even if you have this leaf, you want it to be differentiable and not just one giant blob. You have some stuff on the edge right here. So if I can find my new brush, there it is. Let's make a new layer. I'm gonna just do one for reference. Let's increase the spacing again. We have some angle options. If you ever wanted to change the angle, we have flip Y, flip X, the roundness of that shape, so you can squeeze it for whatever reason. Now on the left we have some interesting things. So you can go into the way shape of your brush is. So when you're talking about shape of your brush, you're talking about the tip of that brush. So hence why when we change the jitter, we can do like different sizes at the same time. Adjust the minimum diameter. We can do an angle jitter, so make it more randomized. Again, if you have like a leaf brush, this is perfect. Roundness jitter, so making it more random. Minimum roundness, you can flip the X or Y jitter and the way the brush is being projected. I'm going to uncheck this. Then we have scattering, which is scattering the brush strokes. You can do it on both axes, so it just travels into space. We have count 1, then count jitter. So we have 16 right now, 8. The next thing is the texture. We don't really have a texture here, but if we did, we could adjust that. The brightness of the texture, the contrast. You could technically make a brush that is not just an outline like this. So this is where the texture comes in handy. We have dual brush, so you can combine two brush strokes. That was the person, and I selected this, I believe, wooden brush, and this is what we're getting. You can choose something else. Let's undo it here. So we have the person here. I could select one of these and notice how it combined the two. You can change the size, the spacing of that fusion, the scatter, and the count. Color dynamics doesn't really apply since we have a solid color brush. Next is transfer. How does the flow transfer in? So flow is, as we said, how much ink is coming out of your brush. We have the same thing for opacity. So this would be good for like clouds. We have brush pose, which is how the tip of your brush is situated. Some noise, which is like little things you can add to your brush. We don't really have much texture going on here. Next we have wet edges. So it kind of gets that watercolor effect. You can build up on it. Build up, that's another thing you can do. So going on top of it. We have smoothing, making sure your selections are smooth. Your painting, should I say. And then protect texture. We don't really have texture, but it will maintain that texture with every brush stroke. And then once you're done, you just close this off and can start using your custom brush. Now you can do the same thing if you didn't have an image. So let's say I wanted to grab something like this, one of these brushes that are currently there, and I draw something cool. I could turn this into a brush. So simply go to edit, define brush presets, then hit OK. And there we go. So it doesn't always have to be an image. You can draw something yourself. If you have like a signature, this is how you would do it if you want to create a pattern like this. And speaking of patterns, actually, once I have something interesting like this, I can actually define my own pattern for the pattern panel. So same place, edit, we can define a pattern. Let's call this silly lines. Hit OK. Now silly lines will be visible in the patterns panel. So if you're not seeing that, go to window, patterns. And if I were to delete this, let's make a new layer so we can delete this. Go to patterns, click this once, it gets loaded in. So I can now use this on my designs, on my photos, and have fun with it. But that's pretty much how you can make your custom brushes and custom patterns in Photoshop. In the next lesson, we're going to go over the last thing that concerns how Photoshop works, and that is the animation feature. A lot of people don't know this about Photoshop, but you can do frame by frame animation here. It's great because you have all these tools that allow you to draw cool things. Why not animate it in the same place? So let's go ahead and use Photoshop's animation panel to create some smiley faces on the piece and just see how we can deal with motion within Photoshop. So go ahead and import this image from the resource pack, and what we have right now is simply our background layer as we've had so far. What I'm going to do is unlock this and simply bring our timeline right below. So go to Window, scroll down to Timeline, and this is where all the animation will happen. I'm going to put this up there. You can also go to Window, Workspace, and just work with this in the Motion workspace, but I personally prefer the Essential with the addition of the timeline because of the Layers panel. So you can see that right now we have two things. They're marked down here, 0 seconds, 0 seconds, 1, 2. But we said we want to create some video motion. So let's go in the top right corner here and convert to video timeline. So now let me just extend this a bit. This is going to look like a regular video editing software. We're going to have our layers and then make changes as we go. So you can use this thing down here to increase the thumbnail, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. And basically you're going to be stacking layers on top, and as the video plays it will go over each of those images. So in one image you can have a smiley face, in another image you can have a sad face, and that's generally how your motion is going to go. So this is more of a frame by frame animation. So layer 0, let's call this our main. And then you can see that it changed the same layer here into main. I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times. So Command or Control J. Let's do 3 times. And then what I'm going to do is go on my first main copy, use our brush, adjust the size, get maybe a white color, zoom in with the trackpad, and just draw some smiley faces, maybe on this one. And let's hide the other two so we can see what we're doing. So there's some eyeballs. Alright, so this is what my first look is. If I bring back the other two, it's going to hide my first thing, because we learned with layers that it's all about the hierarchy. So whatever's at the top is the visible layer right now. So let's hide the second copy, and sorry, the third copy. On the second copy, I'm going to lower its opacity so we can see the smiley faces. And because they're positioned in the same exact location, the original image, I can just change and be focused on these smiley faces. So on main copy 2, I could maybe draw the eyes again and just maybe have this P stick its tongue out. Second one, I could have him kind of be grumpy. And this one, I could have the same eyes. But have it like snore. Then we're repeating it with the third layer. So let's hide the main copy. Based on copy number 2, we can decide our next thing. So this one, I'm just going to keep it as it is. Eyes, eyes. And then just the tongue. This one, I could make it, maybe move its mouth a little bit, as if he turned away. You can use the erase tool to delete something as well. Then the third one, same thing, sleeping. but I'll move the Z's in a different way. So draw Z's in between the previous ones. Okay, so we have three things. Let's bring back their opacity all to 100%. But when I bring them all back, we're only seeing the last edits. That's because these are starting at the same time. To make this like an actual animation, I need to offset the last two layers. So this guy can stay as it is. So when I go over it, you can see it's nothing. Then the faces show up. I'm gonna actually move this. I'll have to draw something here first, actually. Let's hide the top two, bring the cursor here, lower the opacity, and draw something on the first layer. Just because I want them to be alive from the beginning. So maybe have it look to the side, and then like a different smiley face. This guy's gonna look this way before they begin their motions. And the third P is just sleeping. Okay, let's bring back the opacity, and now just like the first two, we're just gonna offset these like that. Now when I go over it with my thing, you can see that they're changing. Let's bring them back first. We can see like they're moving around, they're alive. And when I hit space, it happens really quickly, and that's because we're dealing with one frame at a time. So 0 0.1, 0 1, 0 2, 0 3, 0 4. If I want them to run longer, I simply have to extend them. So let's say the first scene is 5 frames, second scene is also 5 frames, and I'm just offsetting it like that. You can use this to minimize your view. So let's go on 10 frames and then cut it right there. Hit the scissor and just delete with backspace the extra bit. Bring this here, get your timeline slider on 15, cut again, and then just delete this with backspace. Bring this here, and then have it continue for the rest of the thing. Now let's hit the space bar, and we can see how it's pretty cool. I'm going to extend this because I just remembered we erased a part of the eye. What you could do is also open these guys and change your position, opacity, and style. Position just means that you can change where the image is. So if I move it to the side, you can see how in the beginning it's up there, then it comes down here. And that's just a simple animation. You can do the same thing with opacity. So it's fully visible at the start, then transparent at the end. Then we have the style, which is what we've been doing so far with the brush adjustments. If you click on here, you can add more media, make a group, make a video group from these clips, and just delete this track. You can also go back frame by frame, go forward, hit play, stop the thing, go from the start, move to the end. If there's audio, you can have the audio going. There's actually an audio track down here, so you can put like a sound effect file right below and then match your animation to that. Once you're done, you can render the video so it plays smoothly, and then decide where you want to save this at. Another thing that you can do is start an animation without an image like this. So let's go ahead and make a new document. So I have this layer 0 here. It's not an image, and what I want to do is animate my own thing right here using the onion skin feature and just make a silly frame by frame animation. So what I have right now is layer 0. This could act as your reference layer. So say I want to draw a path for my falling ball to follow. I'm going to draw something like this, and then this would be my ground. Now to bring in the actual ball, I need to go over here, new video group, and now within this video group, selected here as well, I'm going to make a layer. So now this is a video layer and not your typical layer. I'm going to zoom out a bit and extend this to like 1 or 2 frames, maybe 3 frames. So align it with 3F and just duplicate this. So Command or Control J until you're happy. So I'm going to go to 6, hit the scissors, delete that, and maybe one more at 9, then delete the rest. So I have 3 scenes for my animation. I have the playhead at the beginning, layer 1. Let's actually call these something. So background, scene 1, scene 2, and scene 3. And call the group falling ball. Alright, so scene 1, let's grab our pencil, choose our color, and draw our ball. Now if I go to the next frame, you can see how the ball isn't there. And that's because we said we're dealing with frames. So to enable onion skins, just go over here and choose enable onion skin. Now what is an onion skin? When you go past a frame, the next frame, you can see how my ball fades out at the end. So in the beginning, it's all dark. At the end of that scene, it's this color. That is because onion skins allows you to see a reference of your previously drawn figure so that the next time you draw a ball, you can make sure that it follows the same width and height and the same direction. If I don't have onion skins enabled, I wouldn't know what the ball looked like. So in my scene 2, if I assume it's here and I draw it like that, you can see how it's a lot different from my first ball. But if I have onion skin enabled, go over here, I have a reference to follow. So I'm going to zoom in here and draw my ball relatively the same and in the same direction. Then that's our third ball. So I'm going to go on scene 3 and draw my ball again, making sure that it looks decent. When I go from the beginning, you can see I have a falling ball. And all I have to do is just duplicate the scene numerous times until my ball effect is complete. When I'm done with my reference, I could just either hide it or delete it and maybe replace it with my own background. Say this red color is my new background, and just continue making my animations. And that's pretty much how you use the animation panel in Photoshop. It really depends on how you use the tools over here to make video layers. It's the same logic as regular photo layers, only that you have a timeline and you're dealing with seconds or frames, and your playhead needs to be able to show that sequence perfectly. You can add an audio track and then render and save it for your next project. People use this in Photoshop a lot for looping their text effects. Maybe if they make a cool composition, they have like the stars sparkling in the back. Generally, you want to use it for shorter and more simpler animations. The heavier works is going to need a really good and fast computer because this is obviously a lot more complicated than a regular 2D static image. Congratulations on finishing this Essentials Photoshop tutorial. You've now unlocked the essential tools and techniques that form the foundation of photo editing and graphic design. If you'd like to take this a step further, check out my full Photoshop masterclass linked down below. Over there, you're going to learn everything from advanced layering techniques, mockups, retouching, textures, compositing, photo editing, color correction, and so much more. I will also walk you through some projects that you get to follow along, and by the end of the course, you're going to have some designs that you've made on your own. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see the amazing designs you create in that course.